Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Returned as a Kid to Stop the Apocalypse? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku was exhausted. His heartbeat was finally going back to normal after the entire ordeal. Who could say that being attacked by villains could be so exhausting? The dust cloud that All Might had made after his fight with the man-made beast called Nomu was still in the air, keeping anyone from looking at Izuku and the now deflating symbol of peace. "I am proud of you, young Midoriya," said Toshinori in a tired voice. His shining blue eyes had dimmed a little because of the exhaustion and slight pain he was in. Izuku couldn't help but smile at his mentor after hearing his words. He had done well. He had saved his idol and survived a villain attack. He felt good. He felt something wrong. Something was wrong, really wrong. It began small. Just an itch, a deep itch. He didn't feel it on his skin. It wasn't in his muscles. It was deep within his bones. Then it began to grow. It was hot, too hot. He began to sweat, to tremble. His throat was dry. Then his blood began to boil. He was being cooked from the inside out. Young Midoriya? All Might began to worry. His student didn't look good. He was trembling, sweating, and had gone pale. Izuku had his fist clenched hard enough for his knuckles to go white. Then the lights came. Izuku's fists began to glow a strange blue light. Some of the pain disappeared, and that allowed him to focus on the new problem. What is happening? He looked at his hands, and the strange energy began to shine brighter. Midoriya, what are you dash? Yagi's question was cut off as the green-haired child disappeared in a shine of blue light, and in another shine, reapered a few feet away from where he was before. Both looked at each other. All Might was surprised and confused, but Izuku was scared. He felt something grow inside of him. Whatever this new energy was didn't stop. It kept growing and growing. It was as if someone was pouring too much water into a cup. It kept growing and it just won't stop. All Might could only watch as Midoriya kept disappearing and reappearing. "Please stop," he screamed. The energy kept only growing and becoming more unstable as blue lighting began to come off him. "Stop, stop, stop, stop." Toshinori tried to move, to do something, but his wounds sent pain all through his body, making him fall to his knees and only letting him watch as his student lost control. He wanted it to stop. But he could feel it growing. It wanted to be released, and it wouldn't take a no for an answer. That's when the energy had grown so large that it had covered his entire body. Toshinori could barely look at it because of just how bright it was. It was overflowing. It was overwhelming. He couldn't handle it. It hurt. It hurt so much. He wanted it to stop. He knew that it would only stop if he let go. So he did. He let the cup break and flow all through him, cover every part of him and drown him. In a much brighter flash of light, Midoriya was once again gone. All Might waited, and waited, and waited, but nothing happened. He frantically looked around hoping to see another light, a sign, something, anything that would tell him that Izuku would come back. He didn't come back. That day, 20 students went into the USJ, only 19 came back. The kids were frantic. They asked all the heroes where their friend was. They pleaded to them for answers. They got none. The other teachers were confused. They had searched the entire facility. There was no body found. How could just one of their students disappear without a trace? All of the heroes were both devastated and confused. They were supposed to keep their students safe. It was their job to keep them away from danger until they were ready, but that had failed miserably and made them walk straight into the jaws of danger, and even if they had done great on their own, they had still failed a child. They had failed Izuku Midoriya. The worst part about it was trying to explain it to the students. They wanted answers, but they just couldn't give them any since they didn't know. That's why they turned to the only man who should be able to give them answers, All Might. But they all fell into despair as they saw the number one hero cry and answer them with a broken voice, I don't know." He tried his best to explain what he had seen, but even to him, the man with a quirk that was able to be passed down, it seemed so weird. The other teachers thought it could be the work of a villain's quirk, but since it seemed like it came from Midoriya, that idea was scrapped. For a moment, Toshinori thought that the boy could have lied to him about being quirkless. But he threw that away as he remembered the look on the young boy's eyes when he had first told him to give up on his dreams. The pain he saw in those small green eyes was so far from fake. Many things happen in the short 3 days after the incident. The students demand answers, begging to know if their friend is alive, to know that there is hope for him, that he isn't dead missing. The return of an angry and mourning Aizawa. He was there, he was supposed to protect them, and he failed so badly. He lost the only child he had seen so much potential in. He had failed Oboro. Then came telling the students and the family. The students were all dealing with it in different ways. Some broke down crying, others went into shock, and some were angry, but they were all obviously wrecked by the news. Even in the small amount of time they had all been together, they had all made a connection with the small green student. Small acts of kindness can go a long way. Now Midoriya's mother, Inko Midoriya, was something that both Aizawa and All Might would both like to forget. The mother had been completely devastated to cry in front of the heroes. They stayed like that for what seemed hours, and with every sob or mumble of her son's name, the guilt inside of the heroes only grew. From that day on, things don't get any better. The heroes try to search for Izuku but find nothing. There wasn't a single trace of the boy anywhere. In UA, Class 1A, wasn't doing good. Midoriya had been a small green ball of energy that had been able to bring a smile to everyone's faces, aside from Bakugo and Todoroki, but on the dual quirk user's case, he had gotten him to open up a little, but losing him had been a really bad blow to everyone. Todoroki had reverted back to how he was and gotten much worse, as he gave anyone who tried to even approach him a glare that sent cold shivers down their spine. Bakugo wasn't loud or aggressive anymore. Instead, he was quiet but ignored everyone around. Most of the bright and bubbly students, like Uraraka, Mina and Azui and etc., barely were able to keep up their smiles, and when they did try, those smiles never quite reached their eyes. The entire image of 1A had changed from the bright, colorful kids that will change the future to a bunch of depressed teens. It had gotten so badly that when the new student came to replace Phil Midoriya's empty spot and said, "I'm not here to make friends," none of them cared. Weeks passed like this. Everyone with these gray clouds hanging above them, never leaving and always reminding them of their failure. To the present day, in the dorms, it was the day the sports festival ended. The kids still gave it their all, with Bakugo coming in first, Todoroki second, and Shinso in third. Everyone was exhausted, and it didn't matter how much they wanted to rest. The day was far from over. That's when out of nowhere, a lightning storm began outside. All of the students ran to see what was happening, as this storm didn't seem natural, and the teachers also noticed that as they came outside ready to fight, what they saw was this strange light of wild blue energy that was shooting lightning, one that All Might immediately recognized. In the middle of it all, Zero points out that something seemed to be coming, though it. As they all focused on what he was pointing out, they also noticed what seemed to be an old man with gray hair wearing a black suit trying to come through the storm, fighting against what seemed like an invisible barrier. And finally, with a flash, the light show ends with, instead of an old man falling through the portal, a small kid hits the ground. Everyone freezes. As they looked at the small child, they all recognize the messy curls of green hair. They see the freckles covering his cheeks, and the emerald eyes look at all of them in surprise and in a way as if it all was a dream, until Izuku, now wearing a black suit too large for his small body, mutters, "I did it." Izuku was rather surprised at how fast the heroes had acted when he arrived. Yes, everyone had frozen in shock, just like he had expected, but it had taken them less than a minute to put cuffs on him, only because he let them. Guess that's heroes for you. So now, he found himself in an interrogation room with various of his teachers and the detective Tsukachi, a man fit for this job with their quirk which allowed him to detect lies from truths. If he wasn't too occupied at picking his cuffs open, he would have laughed at the looks the heroes were giving him, but he decided to start the conversation. "Does anyone care to explain why I am here?" It takes them aback how annoyed he is by the whole situation, as if it was just a small inconvenience, which to him it was. "Well, Midoriya, you have been missing for 3 weeks dash." The detective is interrupted by Izuku scoffing and looking irritated. "Oh, it's been way longer than that," he says, making everyone in the room much more confused as his statement was confirmed as truth. Aizawa didn't like that attitude, but he could bring himself to scold the possible student he lost even if they were different than they last saw him. Look, all we need you to do is answer some questions just to make sure it is you, he tells him. Izuku stares at him, wanting to snap back with, "Of course it's me, who the F else would it be?" But as he looks at his scruffy tired face, all he can see is those lifeless eyes, the blood slowly dripping out of his mouth as he lay dead under the mounds of rubble. He was getting distracted. He sighs and looks at the detective straight in the eyes. "My name is Izuku Midoriya, the same one that disappeared in the attack to thee, but I am now a 54-year-old man stuck in my 13-year-old body and I am here to stop the apocalypse, which should be in about 2 weeks. Is that enough?" As he finishes his sentence, he opens his cuffs and sits more comfortably in his chair as he watches all of their expressions. Tsukachi goes pale as he gulps and says, "It's true." To be honest, Izuku hadn't really thought through the entire thing. He knew he would be interrogated the moment he even stepped inside the school grounds, and that he would easily prove his innocence with either talking about One for All or that they would be smart enough to use the guy who could easily verify that what he was saying was true. And then he would stop the apocalypse, simple as that. Except that it is not just as simple as that. He had expected his teachers to be really surprised, even shocked when he told them, but he hadn't expected the million questions that came after. "What do you mean the apocalypse? Where have you been this entire time? How does the world end? Why are you a baby? What do you mean you are 54? What happened in the USJ? Was this how he sounded like when he asked people questions about their quicks when he was younger? Shut up and let me explain." He screamed at them, and surprisingly, they did shut up. He took a deep breath as he prepared himself. He looked at his teacher and how they all were standing looking at him with confusion and anticipation in their eyes. "You might want to sit down, this is going to take a while." The heroes slowly went back to their chairs, not without looking at the small boy who had taken control of the conversation. "So first things first, my quirk." All Might almost choked in his own blood when he heard this. "Young Midoriya dash." He was cut off by Izuku putting his hand up, making him stop. The small boy rubbed his eyes as slowly exhaustion began to finally catch up to him. "Look, if you want things to make sense, I need to tell them. I know that this is probably the biggest secret there is, but the world is going to end. There is no time for secrets." Izuku gave his old teacher an angry and tired glare as the number one hero held it for a few seconds until he gave a simple nod. "Thank you," the greenette said. The other heroes were very confused about the entire exchange until Mike finally asked, "What does this have to do with your quirk?" "It has everything to do with this. You see, my quirk is called One for All, and it was given to me by All Might here." He stopped there because he knew that there would be questions, and as quick as the cowboy he was, Snipe was the first to draw the gun. "What do you mean by it was given to you?" Everyone, except for the two OFA users, were all equally confused by this. You couldn't just give someone a quirk, right? This time it was Toshinori who spoke. "Young Midoriya is telling the truth. I made the decision to pass my torch to him 10 months before the entrance exam happened." This revelation, both from the fact that there was a quirk that could be given to someone else and that Izuku only had that quirk for 10 months before entering UA, made all stop and finally see all the hints, the close relationship the two how Midoriya couldn't do anything with it without breaking his bones. It made them feel terrible for not asking, for not paying attention. "That makes so much sense, damn it. Why didn't you say anything, problem child? I was giving you a hard time when I could have been helping you," Aizawa said as he remembered the way he treated the kid on the first day. Izuku only went wide-eyed as he stared at his teacher, guilty expression. They didn't know it, but he was so close to breaking down in tears hearing the nickname the teacher had for him. For a short time he had thought it was just another insult like his other teachers and students had done to him, but he slowly found the small hints of fondness and kindness in it, and he knew that he didn't mean anything bad with it when he called him like that, just like how Uraraka had put his whole world on its head when she changed the meaning of the name that was made to hurt him. But he held back the tears. He didn't even let his eyes get glassy. He was trained for this. He was trained to not show emotion, to not care, and this was his only way back, so he did the best he could. He would never show weakness. He would stop. Now is not time for that. Focus. That's something for another day. Let's focus. Midoriya moves to get into a more serious position, looking at everyone in the eye. "So what One for All was supposed to do is stack power through all its users, and I am the 9th user, and you have seen what All Might is capable of doing, and I am supposed to become even stronger. Just imagine that." He let that sink in. Everyone went pale. Yep, but that's not where the surprises end, as it seems One for All doesn't just stack power, it seems like everyone user leaves a kind of shadow or echo of themselves and their quirks in it. He also let that sink in, which caused them to have a crisis. These heroes may have f'd up a little with Izuku, but they were far from dumb. They catched on quickly the meaning behind what those words meant. This man, child, whatever, was supposed to be stronger than All Might and was going to have more quirks. Have you manifested any of them? Mike asks as he looks at the small figure in front of him, wondering just how much power was inside of him. Well, the first one to come was space manipulation in the USJ, but since OFA had made it stronger it changed, and now its official name would be space-time manipulation, or Blink for short. He demonstrated by teleporting around the room in small flashes of blue light, and when he was back on his chair he was wearing Aizawa's capture scarf, which was too big for him as it was all of his clothes. Who would have guessed? This thing is pretty nice. Aizawa looked at his now bare neck. He hadn't even felt the kid take it, so how did he do it? The second one is Black Whip. This one didn't change much like Blink did, but it's much more powerful than it was before. Izuku then let a few tendrils of black energy come from his arm and grab some of the things that were in the room to show it of. And the third one is... He took a moment as he remembered the times he spoke with Nana. She knew and warned him that if he ever told Yagi about this he might not take it too well. It's called float. He begins slowly floating, enough for them to see but not high enough for him to smack his head against the ceiling. Toshinori brings a hand to cover his mouth as tears begin to form in his eyes. Sadly, those are all the quirks I can use, Izuku said as he slowly descended back onto his chair. All Might was trying his best not to cry, which was not that good as he was already sobbing, tears threatening to fall, but this statement caused Midnight to ask, "What do you mean those are the ones you can use? You said you are the Nineth user, what about the other 6 quirks?" Izuku grimaced at the question. There was a very valid reason why he couldn't use them. If I tried using any of them I would die, probably on the spot. He pretty much spits the answer since he pretty much hated how he not only had lost all the muscle he had gotten in 41 years and more than half of his arsenal, all because they required a bit of muscle. What the? Mike asks quietly as he tries to wrap his head around what? A 4th or 5th bomb of knowledge dropped on him in less than an hour. Yeah, they require a lot more muscle than these noodle arms have to work. He tries to emphasize this by waving his arms, emphasizing on tries, since they couldn't actually see them since he was still wearing an oversized suit that covered them completely. A silence fell in the room as the heroes tried to understand everything that they had just been told. It was as if this child had just gotten a box filled with weird items that they couldn't understand, pushed it onto their hands and just left. The silence was interrupted when the door to the interrogation room burst open to reveal, no one? No, wait. They all looked to the floor to see the small white principal of the school, Nizu, sporting his signature smile. I believe that is all the time we have for now. Now Maijima, why don't you go in some clothes for our guest, he said as he looked at the pile of clothes that held a small Midoriya inside. Power Loader was confused as he wondered why Nizu said that he had clothes that would fit his... Oh, those clothes? Okay, come with me, kiddo, and we can get you a pair of clothes for your, special situation. Izuku jumped off the chair and followed the hero, but before he went through the door, he turned back to look at Toshinori, who had finally gotten a hold of himself, and as much as Izuku didn't want to drop more on the poor man's unprepared lap, he knew that Nana would scold him for God know how long the next time they met, so guess he will have to drop the anvil on him. All Might, he looked to the ground. Not wanting to see his teacher cry anymore, Nana says hi. He then walked out of the room following Power Loader, ignoring the scene of the crying hero behind him. Now when they had said that they had clothes for him, he did not expect this or even remotely want this. As it turns out, Nizu had ordered Maijima to make copies of the clothes he always wore but bigger since they didn't know how big the small rat would grow, and counting on that Izuku was much shorter than a 13-year-old should be, they found one that fit him like a glove. On the good side, it wasn't exactly the same. They had let him choose the colors, which was nice. So now he was wearing a white dress shirt, a deep blue tie, a gray double-breasted waistcoat and matching dress pants with, thankfully, red sneakers that are slightly similar to the ones he wore before. So now he was just walking back to the dorms with Aizawa, exhaustion obvious in their faces with the way he kept yawning and his teacher's eyes were half open and kept threatening to close. He couldn't wait to grab something from the fridge. God, he missed eating solid foods so much, and then have a well-deserved nap. He doesn't really sleep anymore, his record has been 3 hours. But of course he couldn't get a break. The moment he entered the dorms, he flinched at the loud sounds of his classmates screaming his name. He looked at them in shock, but then he took a step back in fear. He was surrounded by bodies, their bodies, the dead bodies of the people he once called friends, all just strewn across the ground covered in the rubble of what used to be buildings, the fire still burning bright, the ash and smoke choking him. He looked at their lifeless eyes as he began to shake. They were dead, all dead. His friends, his family, everyone. There was noon left. He was crying. He tried to pull at the same energy from before, only small sparks of it came through. He kept trying as he screamed his little heart out. Midoriya! Izuku was brought back to reality as he remembered how to breathe. He looked around. He wasn't in the future. He was in the dorms. His friends were not dead yet. They were all looking at him with worried expressions as he realized that he was on the floor, his arms held by his teacher who had a few cuts in his arms. He then felt a prick of pain coming from his arms. He looked at them as he saw as Black Whip slowly stopped moving to finally disappear into him again. "You okay, child?" asked Eraserhead with worry pretty much written all over his face. The boy slowly began to place the pieces together. He must have gone into a panic when he thought he was there again. He took a few steady breaths. Yeah, I'm good," he said, and realized how much his throat hurt. It must have meant that he also had screamed. Great, he completely effed up the meeting he had been wanting for over 40 years. And Aizawa slowly let go of his arms, but it was obvious he didn't believe him. "Okay, now I think we all have had a really exciting day, so just go to your rooms and sleep. Also please don't bother Midoriya. Tomorrow we will explain things." Aizawa rubbed his eyes as he watched his students all slowly walk up the stairs to their rooms. "Sorry problem child, but you are going to have to sleep on the couch. But there are some extra covers and pillows that you can grab from the co-set over there." He looked at the small green boy and felt a pang of guilt as he looks at his sad small expression. He couldn't decide what was worst, dealing with an entire class of depressed teens or dealing with one overpowered child with PTSD. The small boy in question went to the closet he had pointed out to him and had already begun to grab the stuff he needed. He decided that he had enough emotions for more than a few years and left, leaving Izuku all alone. Again. Izuku pulled out something from his back pocket and held it with a shaky hand. It was a dirty handkerchief covered in ash, dirt, and some blood. Some of it had been burned, but the part that stood up was a name embroidered into the fabric in yellow string. Izuku looked at the name as if he wanted to burn it as he murmured, "Just who are you, Hisashi Shigaraki?" One would have expected Izuku to be tired, to be passed out on the couch of the living room in the 1A dorms like he had looked like a few hours ago, but really he had thrown away the necessity to sleep after he had made a deal with a devil wearing stilettos. All he really needed was a half-hour nap and a few cups of coffee, and he was ready to go. If he remembered, no one in his class drank coffee, so he was a little surprised to see coffee beans and a coffee pot, but that didn't really help his mood. He was right now having a tantrum on the top of a building after having beaten a couple street thugs and small villains asking for information on the annoying mystery that was Hisashi Shigaraki. All he had gotten until now was that they had heard about a man called Tamura Shigaraki, and it wasn't like he didn't know who the literal man-child covered in hands was. It was his only lead, but it was a dangerous one. He could go and try to track the handman down and try to get information out of him, but he had also considered the fact that his quirk was incredibly dangerous and that he wouldn't be alone, considering how the mist guy had acted around him, like some kind of nanny or something like that. Then came the fact of just how many people in the world are called Hisashi or Shigaraki. He had no way of searching up people's files to see who they were and track them down, but doing that would still take too long, and hell, what if the BSDRD wasn't even in Japan? He could be on the other side of the world doing something, and he would never know or be able to stop him. His stupid gamble had too many blank spaces that he hadn't even considered, and as he kept finding more and more, it did nothing to get him out of his now even worse mood. He wanted to scream so badly, to tell the world how done with it all he was, even if he had just began his dumb mission to save the world less than a few hours ago. But someone seemed to have the same idea as a scream piercing the quiet night. Now Izuku wasn't a hero, he had thrown that idea away a long time ago, and he also wasn't a vigilante, so in any other time he would have ignored it and just left to try and get more or really any information on his target, but this time he turned to the scream of fear and panic and ran to it. They were young, too young. He kept blinking over the rooftops, going as fast as he could to try to reach where he thought the screams had come from. He finally stopped when he heard a group of people running on the street below him. He heard many different pairs of feet and one very small pair. He looks over the edge to see a small girl with white hair run with all her might as a group of men, some with their quirks at full display and others with guns, just screaming how they needed to capture the girl, that they needed her alive. Izuku may not be the nicest person or a saint, but the one thing he hated the most was people who hurt children. They were supposed to have a nice childhood, to be treated with care, respect and kindness, not to be chased in the middle of the night like some animal. He needed to de-stress, and he would be helping someone, so he jumped into action, quite literally, as he jumped off the roof to then blink in the middle of the air and reappear in front of the group of bad guys, cutting their little chase and blocking their path to the girl. With his height, he had to raise his neck to see the faces of the rather ugly men in front of him. They all looked confused as they tried to understand where this small child in rather fancy clothes came from and what he was doing facing off against them. Then that confusion changed to evil grins showing off their yellow, unkempt teeth. "And who are you supposed to be, kid?" A man with hair that seemed to move as if it was alive asked him with a laugh. "Forget about him, he is just some kid trying to play hero," a man in the back of the group said, causing the entire group to laugh. Izuku didn't laugh. He just stared at them, analyzing their weak points and which parts of their quirks to avoid, just like he had done time and time again. "Just get out of here, kid. This doesn't have to get messy." This time a woman whose eyes were shining a deep blue said. Midoriya just gave them all a cold, bored look, and then a smirk came into his face. "You don't have enough men for messy." This causes the reaction he wanted. They get angry and try to attack him, but they all only hit empty air as the greenette was already gone in a blink, only to appear on the woman's back and grab a good handful of her hair and pulled, getting the attention of the other men. He quickly disappeared to leave the woman get hit by her own partner attacks. He reappears, sliding across the floor, right between the legs of one of the men with guns, plucking the man's gun out of his ankle holster and firing several shots upward. Blink. Izuku reappears in midair, parkour bouncing off the nearest wall, using float to make things easier and roundhouse kicking one of the thugs in the face. Blink. He reappears and one of them opens fire, only for him to blink away, letting the man spray one of his teammates, making them look like cheese with the holes now covering their body. Blink. The greenette appears, whipping a black whip, and quickly impales another thug against the wall, quivering as they vomit blood to the floor. Blink. 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 The boy pops in and out of existence, fighting hand-to-hand with two other thugs simultaneously. Then with the last two thugs, he does one of his favorite moves and wraps Black Whip around their necks and squeezes really tight, not letting any oxygen fill their lungs. And to add a cherry on top, he pulls and brutally cuts their heads off. With a feral look he watches as their heads fall to the ground, the stumps spewing blood like fountains. "Anyone else?" He asked the corpses, but he hadn't expected an answer as he heard a small voice behind him. No, that was all of them. Izuku turned to see the white-haired girl peeking from behind a trash can. Now he actually got a better look at her. They were much shorter than he was. Her dangerously skinny body was not a good sign. Her white hair looked more grayish because of all the dirt and God knows what on it. On her forehead was a small horn, and she had a pair of red eyes that showed nothing but a deep-rotted sadness and pain. Also, "Shit, there's a child here." Izuku nervously looked between the dead bodies of the villains and the child, expecting them to react, which they never did. They actually looked fine with it. That's another red flag in his book. Are you okay?" he asked, trying to remember how to talk to a child. The girl looked at him, a little apprehensive at him, until she said, Why did you help me?" Okay, that one sentence had too many red flags for his comfort. She had asked that with such pure confusion. She had also moved so she wasn't looking at him. He knew that way of acting. He did that for 15 years. She was scared he was going to hurt her for either just being herself or her question. Something in the back of Izuku's head screamed at him. He realized it was his own little voice, telling him to comfort her, to tell her it's okay, to be a hero. His blood-covered hands tremble for a moment but makes them stop as he takes a deep breath. He slowly walks next to the small girl and gives her a kind smile. "My name is Izuku Midoriya, and I saved you because I am a hero." The words sounded weird coming from him, but he knew he had to stay strong. "Now, can you tell me why those bad people were chasing you?" She looked at him in surprise. No one had tried to help her before or be nice to her. She played with her clothes and looked at her bare feet as she answered in barely a murmur, "My name is Eri. They were trying to take me back? I ran away again and they didn't like that, so they came after me and then tears began to fall from the girl's eyes as she remembered the days filled with pain, the horrible red room and his hand getting closer to her. He was going to hurt her. She just didn't want to be hurt anymore. Please, don't take me back there. Izuku considered everything he had just learned. Eri was scared to her core of whatever place she ran away from, and the people he just killed didn't look like family, so he could rule out the idea of an abusive family and instead use the idea of villains. They did say they needed her alive, almost as if they were doing something to her, and as he looked at the bandages that cover both of her arms, it wasn't anything good. "Hey, I have an idea. I know this place with these really nice people. They can help you," he said with a soft voice, offering his hand to her. She looked at it expecting it to change, to hurt her, but after seeing what he had done to the bad people, the ones who have hurt her so many times, how he was being so nice to her even though she was dangerous. Maybe this is that dream of freedom finally coming true. Can you promise to stay with me?" she asked, looking at him like he was going to disappear just like everyone else had, but he just gave her a shining smile and something she never thought she would hear. "I promise you, I won't leave you, Eri." This finally broke the dam as Eri ran to Izuku and hugged him, ignoring the blood he was covered in. He flinched, not used to any kind of physical contact, but slowly felt as his eyes filled his eyes with tears. He had forgotten how a hug felt like. He looked at her trembling form and slowly and maybe a little awkwardly wrapped his arms around the poor girl, letting her cry into his clothes, which were still covered in blood. As much as he wanted to stay like that, he needed to get moving. Whoever wants Eri thinks of her as a very important object to send so many people after her, so they might send more goons after her. "Let's get going, Eri." He wiped his and her tears away, and she gave him a nod as she held his hand tight. Aizawa would not be happy to see them both covered in blood. Aizawa was having a terrible day. It all started with the problem child he had thought was dead missing appeared out of nowhere from a temporal anomaly as a very small 13-year-old child. He knew Midoriya was on the short side, but he never thought he was that short. Then that same child drops knowledge that changes his entire world, All Might's quirk. Him now having like 7 different quirks and the end of the world that will supposedly happen in 2 weeks. Then he gets woken up in the middle of the night by his class, which is an emotional mess, asking him where Izuku is because they had seen him sleeping on the couch in the living room and now he was just gone. Aizawa obviously kept his composure. No, he didn't run into the dorms to check and immediately run back to get his hero suit to go and find his missing child, and told the class to stay calm as he tried to fix this mess. He was then also called because shots had been fired in town and found a couple of dead bodies, 2 that were missing their heads. For a moment he thought it had been the hero killer stain, but it seemed like those were just some small-time criminals. But to his demise, the biggest surprise had just crossed Yue's gates. What he saw brought him to the edge of having a panic attack. Walking as if nothing was wrong was his missing student, covered in blood, holding in one hand a coffee and in the other he was holding the hand of a small little girl who was devouring a chocolate donut as she walked beside him. When Izuku finally noticed Aizawa looking at him like he came from another time anomaly, so he waved at him, "Hi, sensei." Aizawa took a hold of how little sanity he had left and took a deep breath and finally spoke when his student stopped in front of him. "Midoriya. Ugh. Oh god, just what?" He couldn't finish his sentence since his mind was still trying to process the 2 children covered in blood as if it was nothing. Izuku was confused at what had surprised his teacher so much, until he remembered the blood. "Oh yeah. The blood. Don't worry, it's not ours." He immediately knew that what he had just said did the exact opposite of what he wanted, as his teacher looked more worried, shocked, and confused. Aizawa now just had more questions, so he decided to move on before he could have a breakdown. "Midoriya, did you steal this child?" Izuku put his hand on his chest as he said, dripping with sarcasm and blood. "You hurt me, Aizawa. Steal is such a strong word, I would say." "I borrowed them." Aizawa only gave him a glare. Then Izuku noticed the way Eri was looking between him and his teacher. He still hasn't decided if he should keep calling them teacher since he was older than them, but it did feel nice to call someone good that title again. He ignored the itching the scars on his arms gave him and the ringing in his ear from the screams. "Eri, this is my teacher Aizawa. He is one of the nice people I told you about." Eri was holding tightly onto Izuku as she looked at the tired grown man who looked like a hobo, but Izuku had told her that he might seem mean but that he was a big softy, and if Izuku trusted him then he must be nice too. Hello, she said as she hid behind Izuku, not letting go of him, and neither did Izuku. Aizawa immediately knew that these two kids would be the death of him, but he couldn't help but feel a little better when he saw the smile Izuku gave Eri. He looked just like he did before. Okay, she can stay, but I want you to explain to me what happened. Got it, problem child? Aizawa said, and he was about to get another sassy or tired response from the boy, but that's when Izuku focused on something behind him that gave a scared look, and it was already too late when he heard the gunshot. Down! Izuku screamed as he grabbed Eri and tackled Aizawa and used Blink to get them behind the gate and out of the line of fire as a hail of bullets fired to where they stood before. What the F hell? Aizawa almost cursed from the surprise, but he remembered there was a child there. He saw different flashlights sweep where Midoriya had dropped his coffee to tackle him. Whoever it was either carrying a lot of weapons or had some kind of gun-related quirk. BT, if it was a villain, how did they get past him? He was sure he would have noticed someone walking in. He turned to look at Izuku, but his expression didn't seem good. He was angry and scared, and it only got worse when a voice shouted, "Izuku Midoriya, we know you are there. Come out and no one has to get hurt." Aizawa prepared himself to fight only to be stopped by Midoriya grabbing his scarf to stop him. Wait, your quirk won't do anything on them. Izuku hesitated to continue. They are after me. Just let me handle them. Aizawa was a little insulted that the kid thought he couldn't take out a few bad guys with guns, but the fear in his eyes made him reconsider. That okay, kid? Who are they and why do they know you? Izuku let go of him and a little of the fear in his eyes disappeared. I guess there is no hiding it anymore. Those guys are from my old job. I thought I had lost them, but it obviously couldn't be that easy. It's almost like they tracked me. Izuku slowly felt the realization hit him like a brick wall, and he looked at his left arm and focused on the almost invisible little scar on his wrist sheet. At the moment they thought that things couldn't get any worse. Who the F are you? Screamed Bakugo. It got worse. Izuku and Aizawa both paled as they heard the voices of Class 1A come closer. They both knew that those kids are too reckless and only a few would try not to fight the intruders holding guns, but the other were the problem. Too prideful or just dumb to stand down, so they had to act and fast. Aizawa, Izuku was still holding Eri, who seemed equally confused and scared, and as much as he didn't want to leave her, he needed to keep the idiots he has for friends alive, so he gave her to Eraserhead. Take care of her while I fix my mess. Aizawa immediately snapped, What? Midoriya, you are not going over there alone. I'm coming with you. The hero tried to move, but he was stopped by Midoriya, a confident yet sad look in his eyes. No, you keep Eri safe, I'll protect the others. His voice was steady and left no room for him to argue, but he just wanted to scream, to grab the small kid, and yet, he trusted him. He knew he could protect the others, but what about him? Who would keep him safe? What a hero he was. Izuku ran out of his cover to see the group of armed assassins from the Temps had sent. They weren't looking at him. Instead they had their guns pointed at the group of dumb students that was Class 1A, so he closed his fists and repeated the list that they had ingrained into him. 1. If stealth is not a possibility, get you enemies' attention. Hey fuckers, I'm the one you are looking for, he screamed, which got him the answer he wanted. They all turned to him with wide eyes. He could see their hands shaking. 2. Wait for your opponent to attack first, then dodge and retaliate. He didn't have to wait much as they pulled the triggers. He blinked to the side, dodging the rain of bullets that had struck just where he had been standing before. Then he brought out Black Whip and let a manic smile bloom on his face. Something interesting about Black Whip is that since it's made of energy, it can be either much softer than a normal whip or even harder, almost as if it was steel. Another part was that he decides just how fast he can move it, and like they had taught him, he trained his quirk into perfection. He sent Black Whip from his knuckles at the soldier in the front of the group at a speed faster than they could react, and had already been pierced by 4 of the black energy tendrils on their chest and 1 on their head. 3. Always go for the vital organs. Black Whip had pierced his heart, brain and lungs, killing them in seconds, either by how their hearts stopped pumping, their brain functions stopping, or by drowning on their own blood, but that didn't really matter anymore. But even after the blood began to fall from their mouth and wounds, he didn't call back his quirk. 4. If necessary, use anything or anyone as a weapon. Izuku moved his arm and made Black Whip swing the corpse, hitting the others and throwing them onto the ground. He didn't miss the fear and disgust in their eyes. They were amateurs. What did the handler think he was? Some small rat? Well, he was going to prove her wrong. 5. And the most important lesson, everything is fair in a battle to the dead. Don't you think so too, Izuku? Her voice ringed in his head, and it only served to fan the flames of anger inside of him. He pulled the body to him and grabbed one of the knives he had in its arsenal and then blinked. He reappears on one of the temp's back. He plunges the knife into the agent's neck. He blinks away again. Blink. Izuku is using float and shoots Black Whip to grab the temp under him and pull him up. He uses the momentum to spin and then slam the soldier onto the ground, causing a sickening snap as his spine snapped in half and his skull shattered, leaving a puddle of blood and his brain on the floor. Blink. He is already behind another temp. He uses the knife to slash the back of their knees, making them fall. He then brutally stabs the back of his head, putting the knife as far as it goes, and lets the body fall to the ground. Izuku picks his way through the carnage, drenched with blood but otherwise untouched. One last temp agent is still alive, trying to crawl away in fear from Izuku. Midoriya calmly takes the man's head in the crook of his arm. Wait. The man tries to plead for his life, but it all falls to deaf ears as Izuku brutally snaps his neck. The agent falls still. Izuku turns around with the manic smile still on his face and looks at his classmates, who all looked at the scene in front of them in horror. Some even looked like they were about to vomit. And so did Eraserhead. He had come out when the sounds of a fight ended, only to see the bloody corpses and the stench of blood. He didn't have time to say anything as Eri jumped out of his arms and ran to Midoriya. Izuku. Midoriya's face relaxed and his smile changed to a much more kind one as he got to the ground and opened his arms to let Eri crash into him with a hug. It's okay, Eri. See, I'm fine, he says in a soft voice as he picks her up. Everyone almost get whiplash as they see the extreme change in the boy for the random girl in the rather disturbing scene. Aizawa was the first one to speak since he is used to bloody scenes. Midoriya, who were those guys? He asked with concern in his voice because a bunch of guys with weapons had gotten inside UA and put all of his students in danger. Izuku just looked at a sparking suitcase riddled with bullet holes with a tired and annoyed look. I told them we should make them bulletproof. He finally turned to the pro hero. Remember when I explained everything to you and the other teachers? Aizawa nodded. Yeah, I might have skipped over a few details. Deep in the night, in a rather nice bar, a man made of mist wearing a nice suit was with a young adult who could use a good visit to a spa, wearing a black hoodie and on his arms held two gray hands with strange yellow stumps. In the young man's hand he held two pictures, one of a kid with hair of two different tones, red and white. On his right side a small amount of ice began to appear, the other was of a rather angry spiky ash blonde with sparks coming off his palms. It's strange, the young adult begins. That annoying green-haired NPC is nowhere to be seen. The formal mist man nods, also intrigued by the change. It is quite strange, but why do you care about him, Shigaraki? The mistess. Now the named Shigaraki lets out an angry laugh. Because I want to take my revenge on that brat. He took my chance at killing All Might. How is that so hard to understand, Kurogyari? Shigaraki screamed, anger boiling in his veins. He had been so close, and that dumb child screw it all up. Shigaraki, please calm down. Kurogyari was about to try and stop Shigaraki from doing another of his tantrums until a laugh caused both of them to flinch and stop. They looked to the corner of the bar where there was once before an empty table was now occupied by 3 people. 2 of them were a woman and a large man wearing nice suits like Kurogyari and strange masks that looked like cartoon dogs that covered their entire head. But the one that laughed was the one that caught their attention. She had bright blonde hair. She wore pure black dress, almost as if going to a funeral, and held a cigar in one of her hands, but she also had a rather strange hat with veil over her face. Who the hell are you? Shigaraki said. How did he not hear them come in? How much had they heard? What the foo dash? Before he could finish he had heard the sound of 2 bangs from the guns that were already pointed at him from the 2 people in suits. They had gone for his heart and head. He would have been deaf if it wasn't for Kurogyari's portals that had changed the trajectory of their bullets. I have to say, I expected you to be different, being the successor of All for One and all that jazz. She let out a puff of smoke from her mouth as she looked with a calm smile at the 2 shocked villains. Now how about we get down to business? The handler laughed. Izuku was tired. He had gone through a lot in less than a day and he knew that he was far from done. He had just killed a bunch of people in front of a bunch of students and a pro hero. Thankfully Eri didn't seem to mind. But he had to do something first. I'm guessing you can take care of that, right? He asked Aizawa, still holding Eri. The man just looked at the corpses and let out a sigh. I can't, but I wouldn't be surprised if Nizu had someone who could. He then turned back to Midoriya and crossed his arms with a tired yet curious look in his eyes. Now, don't you have something you would like to share with the class? Izuku almost laughed at the way he said it. It's still dangerous here, let's go to the dorms instead. He then began walking to the tall building they were going to stay, but to get through it he needed to get past all of the other students from Class 1A. Thankfully, with just a stare, they let him pass. They all moved to the side, not wanting to mess with the child covered in blood. All except one. A tall boy with ash blonde spiky hair, with angry and conflicted red eyes didn't move. He just stared at Izuku with a scowl on his face and small explosions going off on his hands. Move Bakugo, is all Izuku said, which he knew was more than enough to get a reaction out of his old childhood friend, as the other only seemed to get angrier. You are not going anywhere, you be. For a moment he swore he could heard a soft "that not again" from the angry teen, but he ignored it when Bakugo began moving closer to him. What the F was all of that to dash? When he heard the first part of the nickname come out of his mouth, a lot happened. Izuku's body rose in heat, feeling the non-existent burns on his arms and chest, the worst ones that he had gotten after trying to stand up to Bakugo. They weren't there physically, but Izuku could perfectly remember the smell of burned flesh, the burned sugar, the smoke, the laughs. His head filled with screams, his own, pleading for help, for them to stop, to give him a break, to please just let him breathe, but they always scoffed, told him that he could never become any better with his quirks like this, that he would never see his friends, his family if he just kept crying. They barked at him to stand up, to pick up the knife and do it again, less sloppy this time. He remembered the stupid video they had made him watch when he first got there, the thousands of tests that he had aced, the things his coworkers said about him, dangerous, annoying, pathetic. It all came back to him like a wave, trying to drag him back into the ocean, but he held strong. He had a job to do. When he was finally back in the present, Izuku realized what was happening. He had his arm outstretched towards Bakugo with Black Whip only inches off hitting his vital organs. The only wound he had was a cut on his cheek, bleeding a little after he moved one tendril from going straight through his eyes. Don't call me that, was all he said as he brought the quirk back and walked around the stunned boy. In any other situation, Bakugo would have exploded, screamed at the boy who just dared disappear and then come back out of nowhere. He wanted to do nothing more than punch that FNG nerd, but if he hadn't seen the same, no, not the same nerd, a younger one, kill a bunch of armed intruders in front of him and then not kill him only because he didn't want to, well, he let himself push those emotions down. Midoriya walked into the dorms and let Eri on one of the couches as he went to the kitchen. Everyone followed behind him, wondering what he would do. The moment he grabbed a knife, they froze. Aizawa slowly approached the young assassin, a little nervous about what he would do with the knife after the show he gave them before. They all froze again when he started to cut into his own arm and not even flinch. Aizawa this time ran to the boy and took the knife out of his hand and looked at him, only to see that he was digging into the cut he made on his left arm. Then he grabbed his hand and pulled it out. Midoriya. The strange thing was that there was something in his hand. In between the boy's fingers was a small capsule with a blinking yellow light covered in blood. What the? Aizawa was confused, but Izuku let go of the machine and let it fall to the floor before stomping on it, causing the light to flicker until it finally died. It was a tracker, was all he needed to say for Eraserhead to finally put the pieces together. That's why Izuku was so scared before, that's how they knew where he was, but where did he get one under his own skin? Aizawa slowly let go of Midoriya's and went to get one of the many medicine kits that they had and then dragged him to sit on the couch next to Eri, who grabbed his hand. In silence, Aizawa wrapped bandages around the boy's arm. He knew the other students had taken seats around them, still not taking their eyes off Midoriya, and he couldn't blame them, not after that. I guess I owe you an explanation, the Greenette said, cutting the silence in the room, but his voice wasn't loud or sarcastic like it was before. It was quiet and tired. All the teacher did was nod. It all began after the Midoriya couldn't breathe. It was as if all the air in his lungs had been taken away. But he didn't know why. The last thing he remembers is the pain, the burning pain, and then the feeling of how the rampaging power inside him drowned him in light. He wanted to breathe. He wanted to go home. He wanted his friends, his teachers, his mom. He wants to stop. In that moment, he felt as the fire inside of him finally died inside of him, and the air returned, so he took a deep breath, which turned out to be nothing more than a mistake, as the dust and ash stuck to his throat. And the rotting smell of corpses filled his lungs. He began to cough, trying to get rid of the terrible smells and tastes, but it was too late. All of it had already made their homes inside of him. Until he puked. The smell of the dead was too much for him. As all his lunch came back, he would need to say sorry to Lunch Rush later, but now he needed to know what the hell had happened. Izuku slowly opened his eyes and winced a little as one cloud of dust hit him in the face. After getting that out of his eyes, he wished he could have just kept them close. What greeted Izuku was not the USJ, it was a city, or what remained of it. The buildings were turning to rubble as some fell to pieces from just the wind, some still had fires raging covering them in ash, lampposts laid across the streets broken in half as if something had ripped them off the ground. But what surprised him the most were the dead bodies. Hundreds or thousands of people, not heroes, civilians laid under the rubble, completely still, covered in deep wounds, dead, either crushed by the fallen buildings or their bodies mangled in ways that should be impossible. He quickly brought up his hands to cover his mouth as a shocked gasp came out from him. What had happened? Who did this? Why is it so quiet? There was not a single sound, no birds, no sounds of a fight, only the sounds of crackling fire and the soft sounds of wind, and his panicked breathing filled the empty void. Midoriya vomited again. He shakily got back up, his legs threatening to let him fall and hit the ground as they shook like jello. He began walking through the empty wasteland that was his home, trying to not look at the bodies. What does he do? Why isn't he at the USJ anymore? What happened to his friends? What about the other teachers? Why was he alone? Millions of questions came through his head, trying to make heads or tails of what had happened, until an idea came to his head. Of course, why didn't he think about that earlier? The pro-heroes must have gotten together there, and maybe his friends could also be there. They could give him answers. He slowly began to walk to where he knew UA was, then slowly his pace increased, from walking to jogging and then to running, and finally a sprint that would almost seemed as if Izuku was being chased. The entire time he repeated to himself, "Everything will be okay. Everything will be okay. Everything will be okay. Everything will be okay. Everything will be okay." And it seemed like they were going to be okay as he began to see the massive building that was his school. A flame of hope began to rise. Of course it was there. Is a beacon of hope. It of course wouldn't go down. So is. The words died on Midoriya's throat as he saw the broken golden gates of UA. From the back, the school had almost looked intact, but now that he was in front of it, his legs gave up on him as he fell to the floor on his knees. The school looked as if some kind of meteor had struck it, as more than half of the building didn't even exist, as a crater was everything that was left. Tears slowly began to fall to the ground as he looked in horror, not to the remains of his school but to the dead bodies of his friends and teachers. Inside of the crater there were more burned bodies. He recognized only a few being pro-heroes, either because some pieces of their clothes were still intact, but he could easily recognize the bodies of his friends and teachers, since strangely enough those were probably the ones in the best form. They all laid across, blood coming from their wounds and mouths, their bodies only warm from the fires around them. They were wearing their costumes, so something must have gone wrong. A villain attacked UA. And they had won. Izuku cried. He ignored the pungent smell of the bodies and blood. He ignored how the dust and ash dried his throat. He just kept crying. He doesn't know for how long he cried, but when he finally stopped, his voice was nothing more than a whimper. He doesn't know why he did what he did. Maybe it was the survivor's guilt, maybe it was shock, or maybe something else, but he decided to bury his fallen friends. He had more trouble with the bigger ones, but he was able to get the job done, even if his hands were now stained in their blood. He did get something out of it. He got a napkin from All Might's body. He was clutching it in his hand, so it must be from the one that attacked them, but could he do anything? If All Might and all the other heroes were not able to win, just what chance did he have? Tears began to blurry his vision again. He couldn't stay. Midoriya began to walk, leaving a silent promise to save them all and change this terrible future. But what kind of hero was Izuku if he couldn't save his friends and family? Izuku Midoriya, age 16, 1 year after arrival. He had already spent a year walking an empty and broken world, and just what he had feared was true. Everyone in the world was dead and he was the only one still alive. All because of his stupid time travel power which he couldn't even use. This past year had been hard on the young boy. The silence had begun to annoy him, so after he had gotten a bag from the remains of a clothes store, he decided to carry a working radio, along with a few notebooks and pens. Most of the time it was just static, but sometimes, on those lucky days, a song would start playing. But the loneliness was getting to him, no one to talk to, and he was having really strange dreams of these shadowy figures, probably still not over the whole "your friends are dead" thing. But one day he just couldn't do it anymore. He began screaming into the air, cursing his luck, cursing how useless he was, how he had let everyone die. Angry tears fell from his eyes as he kept screaming. Why couldn't he be better? Why couldn't he save them? Why was he so useless? With that last thought, everything exploded. Izuku kept screaming, not out of anger but because of the pain that came from his hand. Large, wild and powerful, black tendrils burst from his knuckles, flinging wildly around, breaking the ground and buildings around him. He felt as his arm was enveloped in the powers burning him, just like the one that brought him here. Izuku knew that if he let go something terrible would happen, so he held it back even if it tore his arm apart. That's when it happened. "Hey!" Someone, a young voice, screamed, catching Izuku's attention and sparking a bit of hope and giving him the last bit of determination to grab this annoying bull by the horns. If there was someone out there, he couldn't let them get hurt. He took a deep breath, concentrating on the overflowing power. He emptied his mind and tried to slow down his rapidly beating heart. 1, 2, 3, breath in, 4, 5, 6, breath out. Minutes of this went on until he was able to calm down the new ocean of power inside of him. "Well, that's going to be annoying to deal with later," he said, finally coming down to the floor, but he quickly focused back on what was important, the voice. Izuku ran back to where he had heard it. Hopefully he didn't hurt them. If he did, he doesn't know if he will be able to forgive him. He stopped. In front of him sat a small young boy, with a messy head of green hair and equally fluffy green bunny ears, freckles covering his cheeks under his bright green eyes. He gave him a warm, kind smile, one so painfully familiar. "Hi." Izuku didn't react for a moment. He just stared, hands balled into fists, until he began to shake. "Stop, stop," he told himself, but it was already too late as tears began to fall from his eyes as the young version of himself looked at him with an understanding expression. He didn't want to cry, not in front of him. He didn't want to show himself just how weak, unstable, useless he had become, how he had lost their lifelong dream, how he was a failure. But the other didn't care. He just stared at him, no pity, no sadness, anger or disgust in his face. He understood, but somehow, that hurt more. He had destroyed everything they had worked on for years in seconds, and yet, he wasn't angry. Izuku quickly got rid of the tears and looked back at the boy, only to find a small plushie of a green bunny. Midoriya smiled to himself and carefully grabbed the doll. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought he was. That night, he had his first dream with them. When Izuku opened his eyes, he didn't see the dark cloudy sky. Instead, he found himself in a dark place with his back to the floor. He slowly got back up and looked around only to see more darkness except for the strange person next to him. It was a muscular woman in what looked to be an early hero-age hero outfit, which consisted of a dark, sleeveless bodysuit with a high collar, yellow elbow-length gloves, and white knee-high boots. Around her waist was a belt with an angular golden buckle, a small cape attached around the back which hung down to her knees, and over her shoulders was a longer cape, buttoned to the shoulders of her bodysuit. "Good to see you're awake, kiddo," the woman said, giving him a bright smile. He noticed she had a mole under her lip. He tried to ask where he was or who she was, not like he didn't enjoy actually seeing someone, but he thought that everyone was dead. He had so many questions. But his mouth didn't move. He tried to force out anything from his mouth, but not a sound would come out. Maybe something was covering his mouth, so he raised his hand only to see his arms covered by black mist, which caused him to look at the rest of his body, and to his surprise the mist covered almost all of his body except for his feet, hands and the rest of his face above his mouth. He began trying to take it off, but it only phased though his fingers. "Kid, calm down, you're not any danger," the woman, oh yeah, he wasn't alone, tried to calm him down, but how did she expect him to calm down when he is in the middle of God knows where with the first person he has seen in a year while he is covered in some strange mist that didn't allow him to talk? How is he supposed to calm down? "Kid," this time the woman took a hold of Midoriya's shoulders with a firm but gentle grip, causing him to stare at her in shock, mostly because he wasn't used to being touched anymore, so it felt weird. "Listen to me, you aren't in any anger, you are okay. Just let me explain." Izuku, as much as he just wanted to scream, he knew that this was probably the only chance he will get to know what the hell is happening. So he took a deep breath and nodded. "Good, let's begin the history lesson." For the next few hours, minutes, days, he didn't really know the woman, who introduced herself as Nana Shimura, All Might's teacher, the seventh user of One for All. She then began to explain how the quirks of the other users have merged with the core of One for All, giving him the ability to use those quirks. That's when he remembered what had happened in the USJ, and when he met the young version of himself, those strange black tendrils and the blue lights must have been two of them. "And you would be correct, I actually expected you to get mine first since you and me are pretty similar, not like those two cranky users," Nana answered and teased someone. He swears he heard two grunts coming from the shadows. She kept explaining how he would now begin to manifest them. Some would take longer than others, or they would need something specific to use them, so he shouldn't pressure himself when they all don't just come out at the same time. He had all the time in the world. "Looks like our time's up," Nana said, stretching after long talk. She then surprised Izuku by ruffling his hair as he slowly started to lose consciousness, only to hear her soft words, "Take care, kid." When he opened his eyes, he was met with the dirty ceiling of the empty home he was taking refuge in that night. He passed his hand through his hair as he almost felt Nana's warm hand still there. "You're crying," said a familiar voice from his right. He turned and saw again the younger version of himself, his bunny ears slightly twitching. "Did you have a bad dream?" he asked with worry. Izuku looked back up to the ceiling as he felt Ofa deep within him and with a small smile answered, "No, not really." Izuku Midoriya, age 20, 5 years after arrival. In the past 2 years, all the quirks from Ofa had already slowly manifested, and the users appeared to him in dreams to explain them to him, but sometimes he was brought in for nothing more than a friendly, don't get him wrong, he loved to talk to them. They had so many interesting stories from their time alive, and they had given him so many tips on using One for All. He probably wouldn't have full cowl if it wasn't for Third's ideas. But still, he couldn't stop wondering why they would want to just talk to him. "Because we care about you," First answered him, sitting on the ground on his right. This surprised Izuku. Why would they care? He was fine, there was nothing to worry about. "Kid, oh, he did it again." He may not be able to mutter, but overthinking was the same inside in his dreams. First sighed, making him look much older than he really was. Izuku was really surprised to know he was a little older than he was now. It was also really sad. "You may not see it yourself, but we see how much being here hurts you. You have been alone for what, 3 years now?" He had a point, but they really shouldn't be worrying about him. They had more important things to do, like going back, saving everyone. That's more important than him. Another sigh came from his left. He turned to see Nana take a seat on his right with a sad smile. "Yes, those are important, but so are you. Not just because you are the successor, but because it's our job as the early generation to take care of you, to help you grow and be better than us." Nana then began to ruffle his hair, a sign of affection between the two. He always did his best to not think about it when he is in there, but she reminds him of his mother. He knew he couldn't argue with them. They always had good comebacks and their praise always got him flustered, so he just accepted the affection but still felt that little bit of hurry, of self-doubt, something that even after so long, he could never stomp out. "Come on, kid, you're smart. I know that you will find a way to get back." First gave him a few pats on his back with a small smile on his face. His and Izuku's relationship could be seen as something like brothers. He was really glad he had them all here with him. They were the only thing keeping him going. So when he woke up, he did it with a smile on his face. "Good morning," said a voice behind him. Izuku turned to see the younger rabbit-eared version of himself. Traveling with a younger version of himself had been weird at the beginning, but he had grown used to it since he now had a partner to talk about quirks with. It had been weird calling him his own name, so he decided to call him something else. It had taken a while for him to come up with something good. Green had been a very dumb idea. Cinnamon roll? Why did he even think about that one? And any other abbreviation of his name was out since he wanted it to be good and not just lazy, but after getting burned in a small accident as he walked, he thought of something. Good morning, Deku. Yep, Deku, his old nickname. It might seem like bad idea, but he really liked it. It wasn't the mean, useless Deku, but the one Uraraka had given him, the nice, I can do it, Deku, and it also worked as a way to remember his friends. At the moment he didn't think about it, but he had given him that name since he didn't feel worthy of it anymore. He wasn't the Deku who could do it. The decaying bodies of his friends are proof of that. Izuku stretched his arms and a few pops could be heard. The floor is not the most comfortable place to sleep for 3 years. He grabbed the small but long piece of cloth and grabbed his now longer and even messier hair. There was no one that would cut it, and he didn't want to cut more than needed, and made it into a small ponytail. He then turned to look at the broken wall next to him covered in math equations. Now, where did we left off? These past few years Izuku has been working on the correct formula to use Blink, as he had named it after a debate with the original user because space-time manipulation was too much of a mouthful, and found out that the teleporting part of it was much easier since all he needed to do was project a mental image of where he wanted to be, but time was like a toss of a dice. He had figured out that he had to project his consciousness forward into a suspended quantum state version of himself that exists across every possible instance of time. The question now was how. Midoriya was never really good with math, but he had been trying his best and he had gotten pretty close sometimes. Those times ended with failures, so he really wasn't anywhere close to getting back. He kept asking Deku for any feedback, to tell him if he had messed it up in any place, and that's how their days had gone on for the past few years. Until today. Izuku, I think we have company, said Deku behind him, causing him to turn on full cowl and turn around ready to fight. Only to see a woman with blonde hair and all black clothes holding a briefcase. That's the day Izuku Midoriya met the devil herself, the handler. Who are you? Izuku was trying to get the words out, but he hadn't talked to anyone aside from Deku in so long, and also holy shit, there is someone else here. How long has he been alone? And now there is just someone standing right before him. The woman laughed. Oh, don't worry honey, I'm not going to bite. You can calm down with the light show. She waved her hand as she said this and moved her black glasses up. Midoriya doesn't really want to trust her so easily, but he also didn't want to scare the only person he has met in years, so he stopped one for all, making the green lighting around him to disappear. Good boy. I like people who follow orders so easily. She walked closer to where Izuku was. Now, Izuku Midoriya, right? Oh, who am I kidding? Who else here would be called that? She said, laughing at her own joke. Midoriya doesn't know why, but her laugh ends up creeping him out instead of helping him relax. How do you know my name and what do you want? He asked, hoping for an answer. Oh, how rude of me. You can call me the handler, and I am here because I have an offer for you, she said with a smile that sent shivers down Izuku's spine, which I feel could help you in your current circumstances. She left the suitcase on the ground next to her and sat down on a broken pillar. You see, I work for an organization called the Commission. We are tasked with the preservation of the time continuum. Izuku could only stare in bewilderment at the handler. He had no idea what she was going on about. It sounded so strange and fake, but could he really say that? He had time traveled to the future by accident, but it's just that to make an entire organization based around keeping time safe sounded ridiculous. I don't understand. The handler let out a small chuckle. Oh, don't worry, it's rather simple really. Sometimes people make decisions that alter time of free will. Don't even get me started. When that happens, it's our job to erase those mistakes. Izuku noticed the threat in her words and immediately powered up full cowl once again, but this only made the handler lift a hand and say, oh no, you misunderstand me. You're not a target. You're a recruit. This made him falter a little. I've come to offer you a job, Midoriya. You have a very particular set of skills that we have all become quite interested in. This made Izuku not calm down. He was still really nervous and on edge, but something sparked inside of him. Hope? Are you saying that I could leave here? To go back? He tried to not feel hopeful because there was always a chance that it could all go wrong. After 24 years off service, you are free to go to whichever time you want and with a pension plan to boot. For anyone that might sound like a lot, but for Midoriya, That sounded like nothing. He had already dealt with 5 years of isolation. He could deal with 24 years of work. What about this? Izuku said, waving his hands around. Was this supposed to happen? It was, but don't take it badly. Don't think of this as the end of everything. Think of it as the end of something. She stretched out her hand with a confident smile on her face. So, do we have a deal? His throat tightened. The death of everyone, the end of the world is supposed to happen? How could that be? He turned to look at Deku and all he got was a reflection of his own face, body trembling with fear but eyes filled with hope. He swallowed. He grabbed her hand. You've got yourself a deal. Seeing so many people was really weird after years of isolation. Izuku was now in the Commission's base, which was in some place of time, which did surprise him a little, but the biggest surprise was that he was the only one with a quirk there. Handler? He asked. Right now she was showing him around the stations. Until now he had seen how they contacted their agents in that weird tube room. He had met the accountants. Who would have guessed that an organization that works to keep the timeline would need to keep in check how much money they use? But the entire time he hadn't seen a single thing floating or people moving at super speeds or any strange mutations. Actually, he was the one getting weird looks by everyone. Yes, dear. Do you have a question? She turned around still with the same smile they had met, which creeped him out a little. The way the two had gotten here had also been a shock to him. No quirk or any strange abilities, just a super technologically advanced time machine in the form of a suitcase. Yeah, what? Am I the only one with a quirk here? He asked a little nervously since it did freak him out. He had seen people who he had only seen in photos to be people from long before the dawn of quirks and no one from his time, which could be incredibly useful with the company. Oh, how could I forget? Yes, dear, you are the only one here with one, but not the first one to be here, she said as she began walking again, and Izuku followed. So right now there wasn't anyone with a quirk, but before there had been? What happened to them? He asked, catching up to her as they walked across more offices with people working behind. Are those typewriters? They thought they could do things better than us. That's the problem with you quirked people. Just because you have a few different tricks up your sleeve doesn't mean that you are superior. She said it with a sharp tone in her voice, which he knew was her way of telling him to be careful with what he did, which is why we aren't going to make that mistake again with you, Midoriya. She then stopped in front of a room with a lot of different chairs and people inside. He could see a projector in the back of the room. He looked at her with a confused look, but she just gave him a smile. Go and take a seat. The video is going to start soon. From that day forward, Midoriya's days were passed being in classes that taught him how the commission worked, the different wings, the ones who found the anomalies, the ones that watched over the timeline, and his group, the agents. He learned that he would be given a mission and then a briefcase to go to the specified location and time to eliminate the threat. Izuku didn't like that part. The handler tried to sugarcoat it, but the video they showed him didn't. He would need to kill them. He didn't want to. He couldn't do that. Heroes don't kill. That's what villains do. He is not a villain. After a few days he was moved from the class into one which seemed to only be him. They began giving him private lessons. Every day it was something different. How to hide in plain sight. How to disarm someone. How to hold different types of weapons. How to make difficult decisions. How to keep a cold head in moments of panic. Which parts of the body to hit for a quick dead. The most effective ways of torture. They weren't hiding it anymore. They were going to make him an assassin. They were training him to kill. He didn't want to. He wanted to leave, to shout at them and tell them that he wouldn't do that. But he couldn't. He had no other option. They could get him back to his friends, his family. He had a chance to save them. He wouldn't throw it away. The classes, videos, and exams they made him do were easy, aside from the fact that just watching them made him want to vomit. And after 3 years of them he thought he was done, that he could finally get on with missions and finish it quickly. But just like the handler had told him, they wouldn't make any mistakes with him. They began training him. He was under the tutelage of some of the best at the time, 2 males and 1 female. They were ruthless. They never held back on him. Those were the worst years of his life. They made him practice on a dummy where to stab, shoot, and break to kill their target. When he didn't do it right, they screamed at him, punched him, called him useless, and told him to do it again. To do it better or else. And they kept up with those threats. They screamed at him for a small accident. They cut him if he missed a shot by a few centimeters. They burned him if he cried. He was pushed to the brink of exhaustion. Forced to keep going, he wanted it to stop. He pleaded with them to stop, but they never listened. In the hell that he now lived, the only moments he had of peace was when he was asleep, when he talked to the other users. They told him he was strong, that he was okay, that they were here for him, and he believed them. They were the only thing that was keeping him from breaking. That was until he was brought along in a mission. Izuku Midoriya, age 23. The year was they had been tasked to eliminate someone who could cause world war. Izuku wasn't supposed to do anything, he was supposed to just watch to be prepared for a real mission. But they had a different idea. "Here," said a gruff male by his side. It was one of his teachers, and he was handing him a dagger. "What?" asked in shock, looking at the weapon offered to him. "I want you to kill him," his teacher told him, pointing at their target. Their target was nothing of what he had imagined. He thought it would have been someone with power, but all they had was a dead man tied to a chair who worked as an assistant in the White House. He was crying, letting out muffled sobs, and pleaded for his life. But I'm not supposed to do anything." Izuku tried to make an excuse to escape the situation, but his teacher just pushed the dagger into his hand. "Do it, it's better to get you started sooner than later." His hands were trembling. They had trained him for this, but training and actually doing it were two very different things. He looked between the crying man and the dagger. He knew what they were doing was wrong, but it would keep everyone safe. It would keep the timeline in its correct course. It would let him see them all again. Izuku took a shaky step forward. The man flinched. Another step. The man cried harder. And another. The man's screams were muffled by the GG in his mouth. "I'm sorry," Midoriya whispered as he raised the knife and stabbed it through their target's eye, going straight into his brain. The man fought and screamed for a moment, and all Izuku could do was repeat the same thing over and over again. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." That night, he didn't sleep. He just stared at the ceiling of his empty room as his mind made him repeat his first kill. The feeling of popping the eye with the dagger as if it was nothing more than a balloon, the way it went in, burying itself as deep as it would go, and the warm feeling of his blood covering his trembling hands as his ears rang from his screams of pain and fear. The training continued, but he wasn't there anymore. He watched as they trained his body, told him where to cut, where to shoot. He didn't react to any of it. Until they began the second part of it. He asked with panic in his voice. "Your quirks, it's time to train them," the female teacher said this time. But he tried to argue. He didn't think they would make him use one for all. He thought he could keep that part of himself out of this. Keep them out of this. "No buts," she said, making his mouth close on instinct. They would hurt him again if he said anything else. "Now, what can you do?" she asked with a terrifying smile on her face, which caused a whimper to come out of Izuku. "No." Izuku began taking a step back. No, I won't do it. I won't use them," he argued. He wasn't going to use his quirks for this, and he wanted for them to know. "Midoriya?" His female teacher growled at him. This would usually shut him up, but not this time. He wouldn't let them control him on this. "And no," he screamed. He wouldn't use them. His hands were already covered in blood. He wouldn't use their quirks. He wouldn't stain their legacies for his own dumb decisions. "I won't use them. You can't make me." He knew he was acting like a child, but what other option did he have? They were threatening to take the one thing that had kept him together all this time and throw it into the mud. He wouldn't let them. He wouldn't let them take the one thing that he still has from his past. "I didn't want it to come to this, kid, but you leave us no choice," his trainer answered as she snapped her fingers. Before he could react, an arm wrapped itself around his throat, and then he felt a cold sting of pain, and he was already too late when he threw his head back to hit the person behind him, hearing the satisfying crunch of their broken nose. His legs began to wobble as he fell to his knees and looked at the broken syringe next to him. Then a set of clacking footsteps approached him. He looked up as his vision began to blur, but he could easily make out the handler's silhouette and her sickening fake sweet voice. "Oh dear, what happened, Midoriya? I thought we had a deal, but look at you now. Like I told you, you quirked people are so troublesome, but don't worry, we'll fix that right away." With those words bouncing around in his head, the world went black for him. "What are we going to do with him?" asked one of the trainers, looking down at Izuku's unconscious form. They had to use one of their strongest sedatives against him. Just what is his kid made of? The handler, "Well, we can't let this project go to waste now. We have already spent too much on him to let him go." So I want you to make him understand the consequences. Izuku slowly woke up with a slight headache. His vision slowly went back to normal to show him that he was in some kind of metal room with only a metal door in it. He tried to move only to find his hands tied to his back. He turned around and his eyes widened because he recognized it. It wasn't rope, it was instead some kind of cuffs that were much bulkier than normal. Quirk-suppressing cuffs. He began to struggle, but his normal strength wasn't enough to get them off, and he couldn't call on One for All for help, leaving him powerless. That's when the door opened. "Oh good, you're awake," the handler said, walking into the room. Izuku felt his blood boil and he tried to jump at her only for his body to be stopped and fell on the cold ground face first, making the handler laugh. Izuku turned around only to see his feet chained to the other side of the room. He had been so distracted by the cuffs he didn't even notice them. "I see you are enjoying my new toys. It was quite the hassle getting them, but I see that it was worth it." She squats down to look at Midoriya just out of his range. "But you know, I heard that you were going back on our little deal. That's really sad, Midoriya. I thought we could trust each other." "You never told me I would be using my quirks," he barked back, trying to at least bite her nose off. "But I stated it quite clearly the day we met. We are interested in your abilities, quirks included, but the problem now is that you don't want to cooperate with us." Even after all this time, her smile was gone, leaving a cold mask of no emotion where there usually was a smile, and she then continued with a cold and sharp tone of voice, "You disappoint me." She then stood straight once again with that fake smile of hers on her face once more. "But I did tell you, didn't I? We won't be making any mistakes with you, which is why I brought this." She then grabbed something from one of the pockets of her coat. He thought it was nothing more than just a paper from his side, so he was confused at how that was supposed to really do anything. With smile she turned the picture around and Izuku's breath got stuck on his throat. It was a picture of him and his mother. It was a picture Izuku had taken with her for Mother's Day. And now the handler had it. "Give it back," he snapped immediately. He had nothing left of his friends and family. He had not seen their faces aside the ones from their mangled bodies, so this was precious to him. "Did I make the puppy mad?" the handler said as she kept the picture just out of his reach as he struggled to move, only digging the chains and cuffs into his skin. "I said, give it back," he screamed once again, trying to reach her, but all she did was laugh as she pulled something else from her coat. "A lighter. Let's see how long you last," she clicked, and the small flame came to life. That moment was as if time slowed down as he watched the photo be consumed by the fire. He screamed at her to stop to put it out, but she didn't move. He watched as the picture of him and her move was consumed by the flames, his vision getting blurry by the tears that came from his eyes. His screams changed to pleads as his throat couldn't handle the screaming anymore. He cried, looking at the small pile of ash that used to be the photo. He had been so close. The handler said something, but they fell on deaf ears as Izuku kept crying, trapped inside of his own sorrow. She left him to cry alone. From that day forward, things got worse. Every day the handler or one of his trainers would bring a photo or something that he could recognize was from one of his classmates or teachers, making him watch as they destroyed it, burning it, cutting it into little pieces until there was nothing of it left. He thought that this would be it, show him an item and destroy it in front of him. He could get used to it, he wouldn't let them beat him. Then they showed him the videos. In a TV they installed in his room, they would play recordings of how his friends were. One would think that was good, but it was only videos of them crying, weeping, mourning his presumed death. He watched as his classmates with the brightest smiles cried for hours, mumbling his name, how some lost sleep by the nightmares the USJ had given them, making them wake up in tears. He screamed at the videos with tears in his eyes, telling them to turn it off to get rid of it. He screamed until his crying was mixed with the ones in the videos. Midoriya lost track of time as he spent his days once again alone in a cell as they forced him to see them destroy everything he cared about, making him feel guilty for the pain and sadness he had brought his friends and families. Until one day they brought in his notebook. It was a special one he had begun writing the day he got into UA. He had the quirks of his classmates with many different weaknesses, ways to cover them and improve to some random questions he had for them. He had made that with his blood, sweat and tears to help his friends, and now that was probably the last thing he had left of his time at UA. They were going to use the same lighter the handler had used to burn the first photo they had brought him, and he was tired, so tired of this. So when the fire reached the pages, he snapped. The small flame that was his quirk burst alive, causing the quirk-suppressing cuffs to start sparking as they couldn't hold back the strength of One for All, and before he knew it, he had sent Black Whip at them. The handler waited until the sounds were done until a soft muttering was left in the room. She checked her clock. 5 seconds, he could do better than that. She smiled. When she opened the door, she was met with a gruesome scene, a really messy kill, but they could fix that. The body of the agent she had sent had been ripped in half by the boy using what he referred to as Black Whip. She could see the blood spattered on the walls and the large pool of eye forming by the torso and legs, but in the middle of all the carnage laid Midoriya. The black tendrils curled around him as if trying to protect him, but the boy was trying to protect something himself. In his arms was the notebook they had brought in, not a bit of blood on it, but I couldn't be said the same for the young man himself. His arms covered in blood and some of it splattered across his face, but not even paying mind to it as his eyes were glazed over. Clearly his mind was somewhere else as he unconsciously muttered apologies to no one in particular. She got to his level and caressed his face slowly and gently with her sweet fake smile as she looked at her perfect creation. "You're finally ready," she said, letting the room be filled with his muttering once again. The things Midoriya had done never dawned on him until he stood over the body of his most recent victim. But this one wasn't his normal kills. The person he stood over was someone really important. Until then he had only killed people who made small decisions that snowballed into the change of the timeline, like a small-time worker that gave the wrong change, an engineer that did his work too well, or just a normal family man. But now, not only was this his first job in the quirked era, too early for even his grandmother to be born yet, but it was also his first hero kill. He now stood over the death body of the pro-hero Blacklight. Their death had been all over the news the year he had died, not only because of their fame as the number 10 hero but because of how mysterious their death had been. Blacklight had been pulled into an alley in one of his patrols where he was attacked by multiple people. He was beat up by someone with enough strength to cave his skull, sending shards of it through his brain, and if that didn't kill him, the second attacker, someone with a fire quirk strong enough to reach heats of 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, burned their body until it was barely recognizable, also destroying any kind of evidence there could be. The only reason the body had been identified was the shreds of the hero suit left on the ground. Blood dripped from Izuku's knuckles as he looked at the broken face of the hero, the lightning around his body crackling being the only light there was in the alley. This case had been really interesting for Izuku when he first heard about it. In those days, everyone was forced to register their quirks, so when they checked for people with anything similar to what had happened to the poor hero, but there were still many different strengthening quirks, and fire quirks weren't that strong yet, only reaching around the heats of 200 degrees Fahrenheit, so the killer had never been found, leaving Blacklight's death a mystery to the world. But as the heat in his hand raised, he felt as the palm of his hand began to burn, and the blood on his hand quickly dried up as the water in it left it, leaving it stuck to his skin. He activated Flash Fire, a fire quirk from the second user that allowed him to create sparks of fire from his hand that he could raise to different degrees, but after mixing with One for All, he now controlled the size of the sparks too, making them big enough to swallow a small house. The first time he activated it, it burned his palms as it gave him third-degree burns, and since he couldn't get any help in taking much care of it in the apocalypse, he lost feeling in his hands. But now that didn't matter. Izuku made the spark appear and the body was quickly engulfed in flames, the smell of burned skin filling his nose. He knew that his body wouldn't be found until the next morning by a poor passerby, so he sat against the cold wall of the alley and looked up at the sky filled with stars. It almost seemed like they were looking back at him. He felt it. The small flame he had tried to keep alive for years. It had finally gone out. Izuku was nothing more than a dirty murderer. He wasn't a hero. He could never be a hero. As all of his mistakes finally dawned on him, he couldn't do anything but cry. He didn't move, his eyes finally losing the last bits of light they had in them, leaving a dull green in their place. He cried. He cried for the child who had finally died inside of him. He cried for a dream that he would never see come true. He cried for all the people he has hurt, the people he took away from their families. Midoriya cried as he stared at the stars, and they sadly twinkled back at him. He stopped sleeping after that. He couldn't bring himself to be pulled into One for All again. He couldn't look at the only people who had tried taking care of him for the past few years. He couldn't look at the people he betrayed. So he began taking naps, They worked, but now most people would see him sleeping in whatever free time he had. All because of the guilt he carried. The idea of escaping, of freedom, had seemed so far away, almost impossible at this point, until one day. Izuku Midoriya, age 54. He had been tasked with killing a president of the United States, Kennedy if he remembered correctly. He would have never thought that he was the cause of so many mysterious deaths over the course of history, but by then they didn't matter anymore. They were all just targets he needed to get rid of. He grabbed the sniper that was by his side, loaded the bullet and got ready as he held his breath to stop moving the gun. The president was going to move into position in a few seconds, so he needed to get shot. If he missed, who knows what could happen. So he got ready. The air wasn't going against him, so the bullet shouldn't stray from the course. The distance was enough so that if he would have enough time to use his briefcase and get out completely undetected, the angle seemed fine. He was heading for his chest to hit a lung so that he wouldn't die immediately and instead choke on his own blood so that he would still take a few minutes for him to die, just like it's supposed to be. The radio in his left began to play, telling him that the president was going to move. This was his chance. He waited as he saw the people, the motorcycles, and soon, the car. Then he gasped. He dropped the gun and instead went for his bag. God, he was an idiot. How did he not think about that before? From the bag he brought out an old notebook, a little burned on the sides and some water damage could be seen on it too. The title on the front barely readable at this point. Notebook 13 #. He quickly opened it and skimmed through a few pages. Before, when he was young, he used it to write about heroes and quirks, but now the pages were completely covered with million different equations. He skipped over to the last page he had used. He had been working on this stupid equation for years and he was just so angry that the answer had been so easy. He grabbed a pencil from his bag as he got to work. All the noise from the radio behind him turned to nothing but white noise to his ears as he kept writing numbers down and mumbling. Then he stopped. A small shine came back to his eyes, as did a smile. This was it. He got it. He got up and quickly pulled the familiar energy that was blink and watched as his fists began to glow a light blue. He concentrated. He could only do this once. He couldn't screw this up. He wouldn't screw this up. The light grew, enveloping him in a strange yet familiar warmth, and with a smile he said to no one, "I'm coming home." And with those words thrown into the wind and a bright flash of light, he was gone, leaving only a radio and a sniper on the floor as the sound of a gun firing filled the air and the radio came to life as it talked about how the president had been shot. Midoriya finally finished talking. As he had finished his story, he looked at everyone and he really wasn't surprised by what he saw. Some were crying, others had a conflicted look in their faces, and others seemed to still be processing it. Aizawa was looking at him with a kind of pity. He knew that what he had gone through was something no one should, broken physically and mentally. He turned to look at the weight on his side. It was Eri. She had fallen asleep somewhere along the way. Thankfully it was before it got ugly. "Well, hope you all are happy now," he said as he got everyone to look at him again. He could see in their eyes how they regretted getting him to talk, how they would have preferred to go without knowing all that he had gone through. "I think it's gotten late. Go to your rooms and rest," Aizawa said, feeling the terrible tension in the room, and tried to diffuse it by getting people to finally go to sleep. Izuku had become a pillow to Eri, so he couldn't argue or slip away this time. The students also didn't argue, wanting to also leave and process everything, so all they did was nod and walk away, giving Midoriya a look before going up the stairs. Aizawa, before he left, also gave the boy a look that only made the guilt in his chest grow. He had failed his student and let him go through hell and back, and even now, all that kid could think about was helping others because he thought he was too far from ever getting help, and even the hero wondered if he could ever help the poor kid. When the living room finally was empty, he used Black Whip to silently grab a cover from one of the closets with extra items if anyone ever needed them, and he placed it on top of himself and the small child curled up next to him. She seemed to relax a little at the warmth. Izuku yawned. He had a bit of jet lag, or is it time travel lag? He didn't really care anymore, and really the couch was really nice on his tired and sore body, so maybe now that he was back, maybe he will let himself rest for a little. His eyes slowly began to fall as he let himself be dragged off by sleep. Sadly, he had forgotten about something quite important. He woke up on his back on a cold, hard surface, and he quickly shot up to his feet as he looked around only to find himself in an empty void. He tried to call out to anyone, but his voice didn't come out. He looked down on himself to see that he was still a child but that he was now covered in a strange black mist that covered him from his ankles to his mouth, leaving his feet, hands and eyes uncovered. Shit, he had forgotten about this. Of course the first time he let himself slip this happens. How can he wake up? Does he pinch himself? Hit his head against the ground? Maybe if you really don't want to see us that badly, said a familiar female voice behind him. His entire body locked in place and a few tears began to form in his eyes as his heart began to beat faster. He isn't sure if it's for excitement or fear. He slowly turns around to see the people he thought he would never see again, all of them, smiling at him? And were they crying too? Nana let out a laugh as they heard the mess that were his thoughts, and with a sad smile she said, "Welcome home, kiddo." Midoriya was frozen in shock after he heard Nana's welcoming words. But why were they being so nice? They shouldn't be, not to him, not to the one who was stained in blood, not to the one who stained their legacies, to the villain. He didn't deserve their kindness. He was just another killer, murderer, just another villain that should be dead. Midoriya. First's voice cut through his thoughts, and that's when he realizes that he was on his knees with Nana next to him and the other vestiges around him. They looked worried. He was crying, his whole body trembling, his heart beating so fast that it seemed like it would break out of his chest. He didn't know he could have a panic attack in here. Midoriya just breath, in and out, just like that. First helped him try to calm down, which didn't really help much because he didn't understand why he was doing this. Why help him? "Because we are worried," exclaimed Nana, which only confused him more. "Come on, kiddo, you are smarter than this. You disappeared on us for years after being tortured for God knows how long, and then you are forced to kill. How are we not going to be worried about you?" She stated this as a fact, but for Izuku this sounded so wrong. They shouldn't be worried about him. Daigoro then groans beside him as he looks at him with an angry look. "Why can't you get it through your head, kid? We don't hate you." He goes silent when first and Nana gave him a glare. Nana then sighed, her face softening. There are better ways to say it, but he is right. "We don't hate you." Izuku, hearing those words, seemed to finally break the dam. His tears finally began to spill from his eyes as he looked down at his knees. He still didn't get it. He used their quirks to kill. He hurt so many people. He wasn't a hero. So why were they being so nice to him? He kept crying as he slowly felt the other users wrap around him in a big hug, and he grabbed tightly to them, scared that if he let them go they would disappear. His chest filled with a mess of emotions, the happiness and relief he felt as they told him they didn't hate him, learning they were worried about him. It made his chest fill with a warmth, but on the other side he felt the guilt and anger cry out, telling him that he doesn't deserve this, that he ruined their legacies with his blood. Stained hands, that he was a murderer, a killer, a villain. It made his heart so heavy it almost seemed that it would drag him into the ground. He finally cried. He let the year's worth of tears finally go, making a weight on his shoulders to disappear, if only slightly. A voice in the back of his mind still whispered to him that he didn't deserve their love, their forgiveness, and even if he did agree with it, for now, he would push it aside to be with his family. "It's okay, everything is okay, we are here for you," were the only words that filled Izuku's head that moment, and he couldn't be happier. Midoriya was woken up by the sound of hushed voices. All the training and dangers he had experienced made him a light sleeper, so he slowly sat up only to notice his vision was blurry. For a moment he thought it was because of his age, until he remembered he wasn't an old raisin anymore, so the other answer was. He rubbed his eyes and was a little surprised to see that he had been crying. He held a small smile for a moment. In a strange way he missed waking up like this, not crying because of the nightmares or the pain but because of them. He looked around the room to see Aizawa, Yaoyorozu and Ida talking in whispers in the kitchen. They didn't seem to have noticed him yet. He tried to move a little more until he felt something pulling on his clothes. He turned around and looked at the small sleeping figure of Eri tightly holding on to him. Now that he got a better look at her in the light of the early morning, he didn't like it. Her body was thin, too thin to be healthy. It looked like she had been fed in days. Her arms and legs were covered in bandages. A few of them had fallen and showed horrible scars of many different reasons, needles, cuts and different bruises, and her eyes, even if they still held a shine to them, were filled with a deep sadness and despair. All of these things made a fire of hate rise inside of him. Which brought the question, why did he pick up a random child from the street? The answer was both simple and complicated at the same time. She reminded him of himself. When he looked at her, he could see how he was before, a scared young child that had been given a terrible hand in the unfair game of life. He saw an abused child pushed to their limits, someone whose innocence was stolen too early. He couldn't wait to find whoever was responsible for hurting her and tearing them to bloody pieces, but he wouldn't do it quickly. He would make it last, and that was a promise. He was snapped out of his plans for murder when he heard footsteps from the kitchen. He turned around to see it his teacher walking up to him. He made a quick sign for him to keep quiet by putting a finger over his lips and pointing at Eri. The hero understood and nodded but then stopped before signing in sign language. "Meet me in Nisa's office in 10. We need to talk." Izuku nodded and signed back a simple okay, which seemed to surprise him a little, but decided to finally leave. He wanted to try and think why he wanted to talk to him and even more in Nisa's office, but it was hard considering the many different things that had happened in one night, and even more when he heard a gasp from the staircase. He turned around to see some of his class and a starry-eyed Mina looking at him and Eri. He gave them a glare which seemed to give the message of silence pretty clear as they tried to make as little noise as possible, which, considering them, was not a lot. The only thing that annoyed him was how many photos they were taking of them. Isn't this an invasion of privacy or something like that? Finally Eri slowly woke up, still holding on to him with one hand as she rubbed her eyes with the other. She curiously looked around at the other students and her new surroundings, and she did seem to panic a little but seemed to calm down thanks to him being there. As much as he wanted to stay there with his new daughter Eri, he still needed to meet Aiza in Nisa's office, and he didn't want to be late for that weird rat. So he told Eri that he would be gone for a few minutes, but that if she needed anything she could ask one of his friends. She looked a little nervous about him leaving and she asked, Are they nice?" Izuku noted her trust issues down as something else about her in his mind, just as he also noted down that he should slowly cut the fingers of whoever hurt her aside from everything else he had planned. He turned around to his friends and gave them all a murderous glare, making them pale and nod their heads. With that out of the way, Izuku finally left the dorms and, not wanting to walk all the way there, just blinked to the front of the office, appearing right next to Eraserhead, making him jump but quickly going back to his tired expression. "I don't think I will ever get used to that," he says, getting a laugh from the boy, and finally opened the door where they saw the small chimera drinking tea. "Great to see that you are both here. Take a seat please, we have a lot to talk about." "I see. So you are the one who attacked you," a man wearing a blood-red scarf said as he stood in the middle of Kurogira's bar. This was the dangerous hero killer Stain, and was facing off with Shigaraki as the handler watched from her seat in one of the tables, a glass of whiskey on her hand. "And now you want to recruit me too?" Shigaraki was leaning against the bar table as he looked at Stain through the spaces between fingers in the hand covering his face. "Yeah, it'll be great. You are already a really high level." Stain eyes narrowed as his long tongue licked his lips. "And what's your mission?" Stain asked. In all honesty, he was quite the complex villain, one that only went after those corrupt heroes who used their powers for evil while keeping the fake smiles up to fool everyone. But not him. He saw through those masks and cut them down for everyone to see, so the meaning of this question weighed heavily on his decision, and the handler knew that. Which is why she cut off Shigaraki and gave her own little answer. "It's to create a more equal world for all." She had always been good words as she noticed the way his eyes glint with a small spark of interest in his eyes. Shigaraki, on the other side, didn't look happy at her, but she just ignored him. He would thank her later on. "But we also need help with a little something. There's this man who poses a danger to heroes, villains and civilians alike, and recently we heard news that they were going to go after All Might next, and so we thought, who better for the job than you?" By now, Stain's attention was settled on her and his back fully turned to the angry brat that is Shigaraki, but she still saw the doubt in his eyes, but it was quickly consumed by curiosity. "And who is this person?" With a smile, she gave him the folder she had been keeping with her in case this happened. Stain opened the folder to see that the first page was a detailed description of what they could do, also accompanied by the picture of an old man with silver white hair and the smallest hints of green hair in there. As much as he hated it, he had to admit that he was impressed. They spend most of their life training in assassination with almost any kind of weapon there is, and had their body, even at their old age, at peak condition. They held an analytical mind like no other, capable of forming plans in seconds. "I still don't see how they could be a threat to someone like All Might." He said this with anger as he didn't like how they said that someone like the only person he has deemed as a true hero could be taken out by a mere assassin. Oh, don't judge a book by its cover. All might may be strong, but I don't want to ruin the surprise. Keep reading. The smile she still held made it seem to him like she was just playing, like she wasn't taking any of this seriously, but he was curious to know why they thought he could take on All Might. He flipped page to see a description of their quirk. It allowed them to stockpile energy and enhance their strength, speed and reflexes to superhuman levels, and as noted there, strongest is capable to not only completely blow someone's head apart, but the shockwave can break down walls around them. This made his blood boil. Someone with that kind of power, and they were using it to kill. It was disgusting. He turned the page and was met with another quirk. He turned to look at the blonde woman in confusion, but she just gave him a knowing smile. He kept reading the pages only to find out that this dangerous assassin had not one, not two, but 7 different quirks, all capable of killing a human or causing immense damage. The next pages were filled with names. For a moment he didn't understand why they were there, until he realized it was the same thing he did. It was a list, not of future kills, but the names of all of his victims, and it just went on and on for pages. He found the names of completely random people, but after a while he saw names he recognized, names of both heroes and villains. At the beginning he couldn't believe it. He had heard of a few people who were killed in mysterious conditions, but now that he knew the man's quirks, he saw the pieces fall into place. They were all exactly the quirks needed to kill all of these people in the dead of the night and for no one to ever find out. He grabbed the photo of the old man and set it on the table before unsheathing one of his knives and stabbing it through with it. He then turned back to Shigaraki with a feral anger in his eyes. I shall eliminate this beast and bring justice to his crimes. As the purple mist slowly sent him back to Hosu, he said farewell with a mad grin in his face. Shigaraki immediately snapped at the woman, who calmly took a sip of her drink. I was the one who was supposed to convince him. As much as he wanted to turn her to dust right there and there, the guns pointed at him by her annoying guards who had been hiding only to act if something went wrong, but now they were focused on him. You don't get it, but he is a very important asset for all of us. A good fighter with a great quirk, but if you talk to him it would have likely ended with him leaving us and putting you on his list. So I took the initiative and got us a new, how do you say it? That's right, a party member, she stated without even looking at him, only fueling his anger. Shigaraki already hated adding her to his team. Aizawa walked into class followed by Izuku and Eri. Everyone was in their seats, some still with a few bandages from the sports festival, but everyone seemed ready for whatever was going to happen next, but some people kept looking at the 2 small children. Before we begin class, there's some news you might want to hear. He turned to Izuku, who had just given Eri a small notebook and a few crayons. He turned to Aizawa and gave him a nod as he turned to the class. After talking with Nizu, we have come to a decision that I will no longer be a student at UA. These news, surprisingly, causes the students to scream. They say how that's unfair, that he should stay. A small smile comes to his face knowing that they care about him, but he quickly changes it for an annoyed look as he screams, "Let me finish, god damn it." This at least made them go silent, but they still looked worried. I won't be a student here anymore, but we came to an agreement. Now Midoriya, as you have shown, you have mastered your quirks and perfectly honed your mental abilities, so I would guess that there is nothing more that we can teach you, so I have a proposal for you. Nizu let down his cup of tea as he grabbed a pile of documents and left it on front of Izuku. I want to offer you the chance to be a ward of UA. You can stay in the dorms with your classmates and have full permission to use the facilities in the school like the training grounds and the faculty. We'll take care of your safety. Izuku looked at the papers with surprise. He had honestly thought going full vigilante and go sleep in a trash can, but this is a way better idea. But something came into his head, a probably not better idea for him, but that would be better for the others. I'm going to have to refuse, and instead I want UA to take Eri, but I still want a place to sleep, so I have different deal. I am now your new quirk studies teacher. I will help you improve and figure out different ways to use your quirks, but first we have something more important to do. He smiled, sending a shiver down his new students' backs. Let's choose some hero names. Izuku looked at his students and was pleasantly surprised. They all had their own hero name for their internships, but there were 3 students that had his attention. The first one was Bakugo. When trying to choose his hero name, Midnight had to say no to it twice since he wrote King Explosion Murder and Lord Explosion Murder, it was no surprise to him that he hadn't changed at all. The second one and the least of his concerns was Shinso, the kid they had put to fill his place in the class. He had been given all of the kids' files including his, and it wasn't pretty. Shinso was a kid who was abandoned by his parents and had been jumping from foster home to foster home until his most recent one. His quirk was brainwashing, allowing him to control anyone who talked back at him. He was recommended by Aizawa. He didn't have any problem with him taking his place. He had potential and Izuku couldn't be a hero anymore, so he was fine with it, and he also found his hero name good. The control hero, Mermaid, he was fine in his books. Now his biggest worry was Todoroki. Before he had left he had made a connection with the kid and had even gotten him to talk more with the others, but now he seemed more closed and, pun not intended, cold, and his hero name did nothing to help the fact that he wasn't okay. Snowstorm, even when Midnight tried to get him to use a name with both of his powers, he just gave her a glare and went back to his seat. He was a little worried about Ida. He heard about what happened to his brother. The poor guy had been paralyzed from the waist down, forcing him to give up hero work, all because of the hero killer stain. He hoped that he wouldn't become a risk in the future. Now they had a big choice to make, their internships. Aizawa turned a screen on and names and numbers began to appear. To no one's surprise, Bakugo and Todoroki had the most offers, but Ida came in close third with Shinso. Everyone was excited to be able to work with real pro heroes. Aizawa handed Izuku a large stack of paper, all divided for each student, and as a little bonus, Midoriya had placed his own little notes on every hero and marked the ones he most recommended for each of them, but they were still encouraged to choose whoever they wanted. After a few more minutes they were all done choosing. Some were a surprise, meanwhile others were really expected, and only a small few went with his recommendation. Bakugo had gone and chosen the highest-ranked hero on his list, that one being Best Genist. Todoroki had gone with an ice-related hero. He put that one away. He has to talk to him later. But for now, he has a class to give. Put on your PE uniforms and meet me in Gym Gamma. It's our first class, so don't be late, he said, picking Aries things and holding her hand as they left, not noticing the surprised faces from everyone and the feeling of déjà vu. When he arrived he was surprised to see that the Gym Gamma was a lot bigger than he had though, which was good considering how much space some of them needed for their quirks. He led Eri to a room in the back where he was sure she would be safe and where Aizawa was also going to be to make sure that nothing went wrong. Soon enough, the class came through the door, all looking a little nervous, wondering what would happen. "Alright, let's begin. Come up here and fight me," Izuku loudly stated, surprising the entire class and causing Aizawa to face palm. "Before I am able to give you any advice I need to see if any of you have become better than the last time I saw you. So come and prove to me that you can be better heroes." This seemed to make a few of them relax and get into the mood, as a few of them gave him a determined look, but before anyone could make a move a really angry blonde missile came blasting from the middle of the group directly at the small greenette. "Igyu!" Bakugo screamed as he came towards Midoriya, stretching his right arm ready to hit him with another explosion. All the boy did was roll his eyes and blinked to the side, looking unimpressed at the young blonde as they used another explosion to redirect themselves. "You think I can't be a hero, you bastard?" "Same Bakugo as always." "I didn't say you couldn't." Izuku only glared at Bakugo as he came at him. "I said that you could be better." In that second the back of Izuku's clothes burst open as black tentacles came from his back. By the time Bakugo realized what was about to happen, it was already too late. The tentacles shot forward and restrained Bakugo. Two held his wrist, not letting him move his hands. Two more restrained his feet and one more wrapped around his neck. It didn't put enough pressure to snap his neck, but it was enough to make him freeze. "You all think that you can become heroes with what you have, but the truth is, you are not prepared for the world." Izuku then looked at the other students watching. Some looked worried for their classmate and the other looked scared. "You survived the USJ by almost pure luck. The people there were nothing more than a few thugs, but there are people out there that will not hesitate to put a knife through your chest." He let go of the blonde, making him fall to the ground as he rubbed his neck and looked at the small green child. "What you have now is good, but it isn't good enough. You can't go around life with only brute force. You need to learn how to control your quirks better so that what happened in the USJ never repeats itself." As he finished, silence fell over the room. None of the students dared say anything against their teacher. The display of power he gave after toying with one of the strongest of their classroom made things clear to them. They weren't dealing with a young kid. This was someone who had gone through their own set of trials and come back out different. This wasn't the same Izuku Midoriya they once met. Now, Black Whip retreated back into Izuku, but the aura he gave never left, and he sent a shiver down his students' backs as he eyed them like a predator to his next meal. Who wants to be next? How? He screamed. How did you lose her? She is just a child. Chisaki slammed his fist on his desk, seething with anger. How could this have happened? Eri running away had become a normal thing. She did it almost every week and it always ended the same. They catch her, they bring her back and he punishes her, but somehow, for some reason, the goons he had sent to bring her back had been annihilated. One of them had been riddled with bullets from their own teammates, another was impaled and 2 of them had been decapitated. Someone had interfered and they had taken Eri. He had no idea who they were or where they were hiding, but they had just taken the most important factor of his plan. Without Eri he won't be able to make any more bullets. He doesn't even know if the ones he has even work. Sir. One of his subordinates, a low-level grunt whose name he didn't know, they looked nervous and they should be as Chisaki was on a thin rope from destroying everything in his office. What are we gonna do? Yes, the million-dollar question, what are they going to do now that they lost their most important asset? It's really simple actually, we are taking what is mine back. Overhaul stood up from his chair and walked to the door. The grunt stood straight as his angry boss walked closer to him. Overhaul removed one of his gloves and quickly grabbed the grunt's face and let his quirk course through him, ignoring the screams of the grunt only for them to disappear as their body exploded in a mess of blood staining him and the walls. He had no time to feel fear for just how much filth there was. He opened the door and walked out of his office. He would get back Eri, even if he needed to bring this city to its knees. I have never been more disappointed in my life. Izuku looked at his students as they laid on the ground exhausted and covered in bruises. They just groaned as an answer. When I was told that the day I came back was the sports festival, I expected you all to be stronger, but I got nothing. The students slowly began to stand back up. That's something he can give them. They are too dumb to stay down. He tried breathing, but after the punch in the gut he gave him, all of his air had been pushed out of his lungs and the pain didn't allow him to get it back. Stand up, snarled his trainer. He tried taking in gasps of air and slowly tried to push himself back up, but his legs were shaking too much. When his teacher saw this, he scoffed and grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and forced him to stand back up. His knees wobbled and his stomach was spinning, threatening to spill all of its contents. His vision was blurry thanks to the tears in his eyes, so he couldn't see the incoming fist that hit him square in the face, throwing him onto the ground once again. The tears finally fell and sobs were coming from him as he spit out blood. Bruises covered his body, making every small movement hurt. His trainer looked at him like a piece of trash, their knuckles covered in blood. His blood. He wants to run, but he knows that if he does he will only be making things worse for himself, so. Izuku shakes his head, brushing away the painful memory, and focuses on the task at hand. He huffs, class will finish soon, so take what's left of it to rest. By tomorrow before you leave for your internships I'll hand you out reviews on how you did today and ways that you could improve. The students seemed to let out a collective sigh of relief as they all left for the benches. Some gave him a few looks, concern, confusion and anger. He ignored them and walked back to where Aizawa and Eri were. Don't you think you were too rough on them? Asked Aizawa with his usual calm face, but in his voice he could hear what he could say was a joke. He just chuckled. Aren't you the man who uses expulsion as a light joke? He shot back, making his teacher, co-worker, roll his eyes. He turned to look at Eri, who had been working on a crayon drawing. He recognized the drawing as the time they first met in the alley. He smiled at her, but he couldn't help the anger that formed in his chest. He had saved her, but he had no idea from what. She had pretty much stuck to him ever since he got her, and she showed that she trusted him with her life, which showed just how badly her other relationships had been to cling to the first person to show her normal human decency. He hadn't tried to push it, but he needed to know just what was it that happened to her, to know who hurt her, and then, he looked at her small bandaged arms and he felt his blood boil and he clenched his palms, ignoring how they were burning. Make them taste their own medicine. Class finally ended and they were dismissed so they could go and change and get ready for their next class. Izuku asked Aizawa to take care of Eri for a few minutes. He looked annoyed, but he could see in his body language how he was faking it. He stayed in the training room. He had checked and no one was going to use the room that day, so he decided that it would be a good time to get some training in. It's not like he wasn't any good with his quirks. Yes, being a small child with no muscle did give him a big disadvantage, but the idea of training to keep his skills at top form had been beaten quite badly into him. When he finally finished, he looked down at himself. He was happy to be able to use Black Whip, Float, and Blink, but he really didn't feel comfortable not being able to use all the other quirks. It didn't exactly feel like they had taken his weapons. He has never thought of them as weapons, but like they had taken an important part of him, like he was a puzzle with a few missing pieces. As he walked out of the training ground, he ran into the last person he wanted to see. Oh, young Midoriya. Toshinori was surprised when he saw the young boy. It actually felt like he hadn't seen him since he came back, and he wanted to talk to him. Toshinori might not know this, but Izuku had been avoiding him. He had been doing his hardest to always move around when the hero was busy with something so that they wouldn't have to talk, but of course, the moment he lowered his guard, this happens. "Hi, Toshinori," Izuku said. The other students didn't know he was All Might, so they needed to keep that a secret. All Might felt a little sad when he heard his successor call him like that, not the usual excited All Might he always gave him with that bright smile. Now he had a hardened expression that didn't fit a young child. "Midoriya, may I talk to you?" carefully asked the secret #1 hero. He knew that this wasn't the same bright-eyed boy he had trained, so he approached carefully. "Aren't we already talking?" "Go ahead," Izuku said with some sarcasm. It at least helped with the tense atmosphere as All Might laughed at the joke. "Thank you, my boy. What I wanted to say was..." Toshinori took a deep breath and bowed in front of his ex-student. "I am sorry, Midoriya." This caught Izuku by surprise. He had expected almost everything from All Might, asking for help in teaching, advice, or even for him to give his quirk back, but not this. What?" was all he could say. "I am sorry, Midoriya," All Might repeated. "I promised to protect you, to be your mentor, but back at the... I couldn't keep my promise. I failed you, and I can see that my mistakes have brought you a lot pain, so please forgive me." When Aizawa had told the other staff what had happened between Midoriya's disappearance, he had wanted to find the people who had tortured him and hit them with a Texas smash to the face. Izuku just stood there in shock with his eyes wide open, and for a moment, only for a second, he felt his throat ache as he held back the tears. Why was he apologizing? He did nothing wrong. What had happened back then wasn't his fault. Nothing about what he had gone through was his fault. If anyone needed to apologize, it would be him. He was the one who tainted the quirk with blood, the one that failed to keep his promise to All Might, the one who let everyone die. He took a deep breath in and moved his hand and rested it on top of All Might's head, a strange warm feeling filling his chest as he ruffled his old teacher's hair. "It's okay, I know you did your best." All Might slowly looked up to see his student's face, and for a second he saw the young boy he had trained, the one full of hope in his eyes with a familiar smile. The smile that always helped him get back up. Maybe it was just what Izuku had told him about the dreams he had with the past users, but for a second, behind Izuku he saw Nana smiling with a hand on the young boy's shoulder. All Might straighten up again with a smile and a few small tears in his eyes. "Thank you, my boy. I promise you that this time I will be next to you when you need it." With that weight off his chest and new vigor, the blonde teacher left. Izuku looked down at his hand as he felt the warm feeling inside of his chest settle, remembering the times when the vestiges played with his own hair. They all really liked it since it was always so big and fluffy, a small smile on his lips as he began walking to the teacher's lounge. Only to be met with a surprise. "I am going to what?" Izuku asked, looking at Aizawa, who was grading a few papers from Class B. "Midoriya, you may not be a student anymore, but you are still under UA's protection, meaning that we can't just leave you alone during the internship since the school will be closed, so putting you in an internship was the best decision since you could also watch your classmates' quirks in action and help them grow," Aizawa simply answered as he finished with the papers and put them aside. Izuku didn't like this. He just wanted to go and find the BSRD who killed everyone, not go on some dumb side job, but he couldn't really argue against the points he was making. Fighting his class was something, but seeing them act on a real situation would definitely help with his analysis. "Ugh, fine. Who am I with?" he asked, expecting him to be with one of the more powerful students like Momo or Todoroki, but was confused as Aizawa pulled a folder from one of the drawers of his desk and handed it to him with a grin. "You are with me, problem child." "You ready, kid?" asked Aizawa as he placed the last of his bags in the trunk of his car and closing it to turn to look at Izuku, who was waiting for him to open the door. Why do you keep calling me kid? I am one of your co-workers, you know, he said with an annoyed tone of voice, making Aizawa huff. Time travel years don't count, Midoriya, was his answer as he opened the door for him, which made the young brunette roll his eyes as he got on. Izuka had to admit it, he felt a little nervous. This was the first time he was going to the house of a pro, but he also felt excited because there was a specific store he wanted to visit. He turned to look at the seats at the back. I don't want to hear you two fighting, understood? Eri nodded as she held a small backpack that looked like a cat, which was filled with different things like children books, crayons and notebooks to draw on. To her right, Shinso nodded, looking a little uncomfortable as he turned to look out the window with his backpack on his lap. Well, let's get going, Aizawa said as he turned the key, and the car turned on as they began to where Aizawa would be keeping them during his internship. Midoriya was surprised when he saw that Aizawa had another kid for his internship, even more when he found out it was Shinso. He hasn't gotten the chance to talk to him yet, but he had noticed the way he acted around him, like he wasn't comfortable around him, which he could understand since the first time they met he came out of a time anomaly and then killed a few people in front of him. The ride went on in with no one talking, the only sound being the low music coming from the radio. Aizawa was focused in driving, Eri was entertained playing with her new backpack, and Shindu and Izuku were both lost in thought. Or he was until he recognized the street they were in. He immediately went into full alarm as he recognized the same traffic signs he had seen either scattered across the ground or bent and broken on their spot. The houses that once were nothing more than piles of rubble and ash, the streets covered in corpses, the ground stained in a permanent red. Aizawa, why are we here? He quickly asked, turning to see his teacher with anger and panic in his face. Aizawa knew that he recognized the street, and how wouldn't he? This is where he used to live. Where he found his mother's corpse. It was only a few days after he had arrived, he had yet to leave his town, with the hopes of finding anyone alive. He called out hoping for anyone to answer him. He moved piles of rubble hoping to find at least a struggling survivor, but all he found were rotting corpses. He had looked everywhere by then. All except one place. He couldn't do it. He couldn't bring himself to look there. His street, his home. He knew what he would find, but he didn't want to see her. He couldn't see her like that. And yet, he knew that he needed to see her. Deep down, he knew that he needed to do the same thing he did for his friends. So he walked. He walked and walked, making sure not to look beneath him as his shoes got stained by the puddles of blood that he walked on. He focused on everything but the bodies, the broken houses, the broken floor, the fires that seemed to never go out. He just kept moving forward. But forward to what? He couldn't use Blink to go back, and everyone was dead, so no one could help him. He was alone walking in an empty dark tunnel, just hoping for a light to appear. But all he found on the other side was his broken home. The walls were non-existent, instead turned into piles of debris on the floor, the smell of the dead still in the air filling his lungs, his hands trembling at his side. He carefully moved through the remains, trying to find anything that might still be edible, until something crunched under his heel. He looked down to see a broken picture frame with an almost intact photo of him and his mom. It was a photo of one of his birthdays, both of them sitting together, him with a small party hat on his head and a white cake with 7 candles in front of them. Both of them were smiling. He gently held the picture almost as if would turn to nothing, which wasn't far off since the edges were burned. If he wasn't careful, it might just break. For a moment, consumed in the memory, he smiled, thinking about the good times he had, but it all came crashing down when he noticed something under the rubble, a finger. He forgot about the picture and instead got to moving the debris beneath him, his blood burning, his eyes locked to the body that he slowly uncovered, tears forming in his eyes at the sight of her green hair and a scream escaping him when he saw her dead eyes. He screamed, tears running down his face as he held her cold corpse in his arms. Memories of the times they talked all flooding his mind, making him choke in air. All the times he lied to her, the promises he made her, he had failed them all. Midoriya was alone. Kid! Izuka snapped back to the future when Aizawa called him. They had somehow moved from the car to the front door when he was still in his own head. You ready? His teacher asked him. He really wanted to say no, to just turn around to leave, to not see her face. But he couldn't run away. He promised himself and the others that he would save them, make a better future for them, but he also needed to apologize to them. He didn't want their forgiveness, he didn't deserve them, but he wanted them to know that he was sorry that he had failed them. So he thought of this as just another small step in his plan. Just that. He gave Aizawa a quick nod and the pro knocked on the door. "Miss Midoriya, it's Eraserhead." For a few seconds no sound came from the other side. A ball of nerves began to form in his chest. He had been trained to ignore his fight or flight instincts, but for some reason the option of running away seemed like a great option there. But his mind focused back on the door when the sound of keys came from the other side. The lock turned and the door slowly opened. A short woman with bags under her puffy green eyes, her hair a mess. In all honesty, Inko Midoriya had not been doing well. "Good afternoon, Eraserhead. Any news to dash?" Inko had been about to repeat the same line she had given him for the past month. She was devastated about losing her little Izuku, but even then a small spark of hope always stayed with her, but she couldn't living like she used to. She stopped eating and instead passed the time looking at old pictures or crying, sometimes both. All she wanted was her little baby back. So when she opened the door and saw not only Eraserhead but her son, except just much more smaller and younger than he should, she had to blink a few times to make sure that what she was seeing was real, but what made her completely sure was the bright smile that came from his face with tears threatening to fall from his eyes. She didn't wait another second and she rushed forward to hug her lost son. He froze for a minute at the feeling of her warm embrace and the tears that fell on his shoulder. He slowly raised his arms, unsure if he should hug her back. His eyes went to Aizawa, who was looking at the two of them with a small smile and gave him a nod. Izuku carefully wrapped his arms around his mother and just like her, tears began to fall from his eyes and words escaped his throat as the words that he had only dreamed on saying finally came out. "I'm home, Mom. I'm home." To be honest, it still felt like a dream to him. Izuku was now sitting in the couch of the living room of the house he thought he would never see again. Aizawa next to him watching as his mother kept shedding tears after hearing his story. He thought about keeping what had happened to him a secret, but the moment she hugged him the dam he had made broke and it all just came spilling out of him. Shinso and Eri were in another room waiting for their conversation to finish. When he told her about the small girl he had stolen helped, she decided to be the best grandma there was, and he wasn't really sure if he had much of a choice when the role of parent was pushed onto him, and when he tried to ask for help from his teacher his eyes just conveyed the words, "Deal with your consequences." "I'm so sorry, Izuku," his mother said, unsuccessfully wiping away her tears as more just took their place. Izuku just shook his head. "Mom, don't say that. No one could do anything and really I'm the one at fault for just trusting a random woman in the apocalypse," Izuku said, rubbing the back of his neck. He had ignored the alarms that the handler gave him because of just how much the idea of being with other humans made him excited. "By now you don't need to worry anymore, Mississippi Midoriya. Your son is safe even if in a strange condition and he has UA backing him up. This time I promise you that nothing will happen to him." Izuku was surprised by the unusual determination in his teacher's voice, even more because he was talking about him. His mother didn't answer, instead she just looked at Aizawa in the eyes with her own glare of determination. Their silent battle continued for at least a minute until finally his mother broke it off by looking at her hands. She looked back at Aizawa with a glare as strong as a million suns. "One last chance. That's all you will get." Izuku let out the breath he had been holding in and watched as his teacher bowed, accepting the chance and threat his mother had given him. She may look simple, but she is a woman with many connections. Not long after he was hugging his mom goodbye and was already sitting in the passenger seat of his teacher's car once more, the two kids in the back had small bags with candy his mother had made for them. Aizawa started the car again and they were on the move once more. Izuku looked out the window watching the houses pass by. "You know, I'm pretty angry that you didn't tell me that we were coming here," Izuku said. Aizawa nodded. "But still, thank you. If I didn't come now it feels as if I would have never come back," Izuku said, and the car fell into silence for the rest of the ride. His teacher's house is a lot different than he had expected. 1. There were about 3 times the cats he had expected there to be, and by that he means only 3. He didn't know he was a cat person. 2. It seemed a little. "Isn't this place too big for only one person?" Izuku asked as he moved their bags using Black Whip, a black cat with white spots and yellow eyes looking at him curiously. "I don't live alone. My husband also lives here, but with the amount of students that went with him for an internship he will most likely be sleeping in his office for a while." Izuku didn't expect him to be married. Was that something new that happened in his time missing or something that's already established? He shrugged and just moved on from it. Well, it's still a really nice place, but I have somewhere I need to go for now. Izuku left the bags in the living room and walked back to the front door, but Aizawa blocked his path with his hand. And where do you think you are going? I'm going into town to see an old friend. You really need to trust me more, sensei. Izuku challenged him with a smirk, but Aizawa just smiled back. Take Shinso with you, then you can leave. Izuku groaned. He wanted to be alone, but he knew that his teacher was doing this not for his sake but for Shinso. The entire time he had been here, the boy was obviously uncomfortable about him for some reason, and this would be a great reason to figure out why. Fine, he looked back at the purple-haired kid who seemed to stiffen a little. What are you waiting for? Let's get moving. Izuku walked past his teacher and waited for Shinso to finally start moving so they could leave. He was happy that Aizawa lived nearby the place he needed to visit. He didn't recognize the street at the beginning, but the moment he saw the stores he realized where he was. If he was lucky, he would still be there. Izuku looked back at Shinso. Even now he was putting distance between the two of them. That's not good. If they were both going to be together for this entire thing, they needed to fix whatever the problem was. Why the long face? He asked. Shinso didn't answer, instead just opening his mouth but no sound coming out until finally, "You are a lot different than I expected." Izuku laughed. He didn't expect that one. "Well, sorry to disappoint, and who even talked about me, my mom?" he asked as a joke. "The class," Shinso answered, making Izuku stop and look back at him. "They talked about me?" "Yeah, you were the only thing they talked about, and the entire school too." Izuku was confused. Why would the entire school talk about him? He gets why his classmates did it, but why the others? Izuku Midoriya? The boy who disappeared? The one black mark of UA? That's what they usually would say, and I can see why. A student disappearing and thought dead by everyone would be a big problem, even more if they were from UA. Izuku was starting to get the picture. He was a mistake, like he said. The one black mark of UA. If he remembered UA, in all of its time as a school, had no accidents with villains or its students, but then he happened, a villain attack and a missing boy. They would have been able if only the villains attacked, but with his disappearance, keeping that under the rug would be impossible. So I just feel, I don't know, a little out of place. Being with you. Izuku looked at him with confusion. Why? Are you nervous that people will think differently of you because you are hanging out with me? Shinso stopped. He didn't know if he should say it. On one hand, Midoriya had shown how easily he could end him if he made him angry, but on the other, he remembered the times his classmates talked about how understanding and kind he was, so maybe. Well, not entirely. You already know that they gave me your seat, so when you came back. It finally dawned on Izuku. The kid was nervous, scared even, that with him coming back, it would mean losing his place in the hero course. That's why he seemed so uncomfortable with him. He feared that he could take away his dream. Midoriya let out a sigh. He never liked the feeling of being feared, so he stopped and looked directly at Shinso. "Kid, look, I was a little surprised when I heard they put someone in my place, but the thing is, after checking your files, I'm actually surprised you weren't in our classroom from the beginning." Shinso looked at him with wide eyes, but Izuku just continued. "The exam was unfair for your quirk, but over the course of the sports festival you showed just how valuable someone like you is. And your grades aren't too bad either." He noticed as a few tears forming in the boss' eyes, but he still had one more thing to say. "What I'm trying to say is, I'm glad it was you that got that place." Izuku quickly turned around as he began walking again. "Now come on, we are gonna be late." Shinso quickly wiped his eyes as he began to follow Izuku, this time with a smile on his face. "I just don't get it," a large man holding a suitcase and wearing a deep blue suit said as he and a dark-skinned woman walked down the street. "How is she so sure that we'll find him around here?" "I don't know, Hazel, but I don't want to try and argue with whatever methods that witch does things. If she says that we will find him here, then he'll be here." The woman kept walking, looking at everyone. They had a picture of their target, but finding an old man with only a few green hairs was harder than one would think, even more in a crowded place like a mall. The reason why they were here was because the handler had told them that Izuku would most likely be here, but it felt like finding a needle in a haystack, since they had already confused him for at least 3 different people with green hair, be it either because of their quirks or just because that was their natural hair color. She had been born and raised in the era before quirks, and really, she didn't like them. The man named Hazel kept looking around, not for their target, but because this was one of the times he could actually look at the place they were sent to. "It's a shame that this place will turn into dust. They have some pretty nice restaurants. How about we go check one out later, Cha-Cha?" Hazel asked his partner, who just shrugged him off as they reached their destination. It was nothing special, just one of those stores that sell a bunch of different things, from clothes to kitchen utensils. Why someone like Izuku would come here is beyond her, and she didn't care about asking when they met. The store was filled with people checking different products, some even going into the changing rooms to see if the clothes they saw fit them, but no sign from their target. "Hey, what about that one?" Cha-Cha had heard that line multiple times from Hazel since he just kept pointing out every person with green hair they walked by, and this time she was surprised. "That's a child, we're looking for an old man, you idiot." But Hazel didn't stop looking at the young green-haired boy who was accompanied by an older boy with messy purple hair as they looked at a plushie of a green bunny. "Didn't they also give us a photo of him when he was younger?" Hazel asked. Cha-Cha rolled her eyes as she brought out the two photos of their target. One was the most recent, and it showed an old man with white hair and a few strands of green hair, wrinkles all over his face as his dead green eyes stared at the camera. The second one, like Hazel had said, was an older photo of their target since there was no white hair and only few wrinkles on his face, but as she looked at the older photo and the young boy, she began to see the similarities, the same green hair and black roots, the same amount of freckles in the same place in his face. "You see it now, right?" Hazel asked as his face took a more serious look. Cha-Cha nodded. Somehow their target had changed from an old man to a young child, but she didn't care. If it still wasn't him, then they would just have to look somewhere else. The two agents just nodded to each other as they split and moved to the changing rooms where no one would see them put on their masks.